Hello and welcome. This is the movie discussion Pocket Dimension, where time does not exist. The only thing that matters is film. As always, I'm Cole, joined by my compatriot Jay, and we're finally kicking off the much maligned series we wanted to do. It took us a while to get this off the ground. We teased it for a while, not even saying what it was, and then finally, last episode, we said yes, we're going to do a small series, just maybe 3 or 4, on famous director Orson Welles. And yeah, this took us kind of a while. There seemed to forces conspired against us. We had difficulty just with not just our schedules and stuff for doing the show, but also sometimes finding some of the movies that we wanted to do and things of that nature. But as I said when I did announce on the show, it will be Wells. It is true that he was a name that we thought of when we did our Masters of Film series not too long ago. He easily could have been one, and we just couldn't fit everybody in. But it's kind of good, I think, now that we didn't, because this lets us sort of focus on him more, giving him a few, because he is just so interesting. Not that he's more interesting than those other directors we did, but because he just wore so many more hats besides being a director. Orson Welles is kind of the original artiste and auteur. In our earlier series, the New Hollywood one, where we talked about sort of the transition of films from, especially the director's role, from sort of the guy that just keeps everything going and pumps things out, into more of the auteur or the artiste or whatever. That's really what got going in New Hollywood. But I would say it originated with Orson Welles. I would say Orson Welles was really the first director that brought forth the idea of the director as artist. Oh, and some of that, of course, is helped along by the fact that, again, he did not just direct. That he was an actor, he was a writer, he was a producer, but also in the sense of being a very hands-on producer. And he worked in multiple mediums. He's known by so many different terms, and he's the trope codifier for so many of the things I mentioned. He's kind of the original enfant terrible of film. You'll often hear his name when people talk about an insufferable genius. Yeah, he's on there too. He was a child prodigy growing up. He was always known for being very intelligent and articulate. Even when he was really young, people kind of knew he was going to go on and do great things. He went to an experimental sort of school that was all about kind of I guess more of sort of what we call an artsy fartsy school nowadays, where the teaching is all about trying to encourage and bring out a kid's creativity. He bonded with the headmaster of that school, and they remained friends for the rest of that teacher's life. As a very young man, he left. That's the other thing. He's American. Orson Welles is American, but for most of his life, he was appreciated more in other places than the U.S. It wasn't until in the last couple of decades that he began to get some of the recognition and love in the U.S. that he already had in places, particularly Europe, where he spent a lot of his career. But anyway, so yeah, as a very young man, he went to Europe. He was in Ireland for a while, trying to be, I think, a painter or something. He came back to the U.S. during the Great Depression. This is where he made his first step into the world that he'd eventually inhabit, but not in film yet. He became a very notable figure in theater, and was actually seen as something of a maverick, introducing various groundbreaking performances in theater. Again, this is all before he's not even 25 yet. And then after that, the thing that in 1938, the thing that put him on most people's radar, aside from his film career, of course, is the infamous radio broadcast of H.G. Wells, no relation, War of the Worlds, which often in pop culture gets a bit exaggerated. It didn't have mass panic and everybody freaking out exactly, but it did cause a stir, and there were at least people in a certain limited area in New Jersey who did think something was going on. There's something like over 2,000 calls to the police and stuff, so it did strike up some. it did certainly strike up some commotion, but it's been exaggerated in the telling in pop culture nowadays. So yeah, so even this is all before he's even 25, and then at the age of 25, he makes one of the most important and studied and talked about films of all time, Citizen Kane. So, and it was unheard of. He had an unprecedented level of creative control in it. He wrote it, he directed it, and he starred in it. And of course, it was a big success. Although it is fair to say that the reputation it has nowadays, it didn't have right away. It was a big success, and he impressed the hell out of everybody. But when people talk about Citizen Kane, Jay and I were saying before the show, we even use It's like a euphemism for like the best of, the way people talk about, you know, the Michael Jordan of or the Cadillac or whatever. That's how it goes with Citizen Kane, right? Like it's the benchmark by which all other films are judged. It didn't quite have that yet. It would get sort of rediscovered towards the end of the 50s, start of the 60s, and that's when it was re-examined and reevaluated as this masterpiece. At the time, it was very well received, and everybody was very impressed with Welles, again, because of his age and because of all the stuff he'd done. But at that point, it hadn't made quite that impact. And what's interesting is, for the rest of his career, he never came close to achieving that level of success. Although he did not come close, but he was well received critically. He spent the rest of his career creating films that were not financially successful. The lone exception being, I think it was 1946 when he did The Stranger. That was the last financially successful film that Welles did. But that doesn't mean his career was full of failure, although there's different ways to look at it. Because another thing, a lasting legacy of Welles is unfinished projects. The man had so many irons in the fire and so much going on. There was so much stuff that just never got finished. And later in the series, we'll talk a little bit more about that in more detail, because one of the films we're going to focus on for many years was one of those unfinished projects. So there's all the hint you need for that. But lost my train of thought, of course. But yeah, what did he follow that up with? The Magnificent Ambersons. It's funny, he went from 1 year having this amazing level of creative control right to his second film, The Magnificent Amberson, that was just completely marred by executive meddling, to the point that eventually, towards the end of the 40s, he got completely disillusioned, left America, left Hollywood. He was so fed up, went to Europe, where for different reasons he wasn't able to get much done. Most of it had to do with getting producers lined up and stuff for projects. So this is where it really began, where he had a lot of projects lined up and started over in Europe that didn't get done. He only got a couple films done, one being a version of Othello, which was released in 1952, but was actually filmed over a course of something like 4 years on and off, because he kept leaving it to go do other things. There's actually a famous part in Othello where there's like a sword duel, where literally, for whatever reason, right in between a cut from like one sword stroke to another is like 2 years real time.
Wow.
Before they came back and did it again. So he didn't get much else done in Europe there, although I'm sure he was doing things. He also got enormously fat while he was over in Europe.
Yeah.
So that might have been a little, at which he would just sort of become, again, part of who Welles was for the rest of his career. And again, later on the series, we will talk more about his later career and maybe his supposed decline, and you know, how in some ways he kind of did become a parody of himself, etc., etc. But this is, we're starting one of his triumphs, and again, his sort of return to Hollywood. And again, while the film wasn't financially successful, it was considered a very good movie in its time, and to this day, and that is 1958's Touch of Evil, which we talked about this before when we talked about film noir, and we said how it's weird how with certain there's very specific sorts of art, like a genre and stuff, sometimes it's kind of understood, not by everybody. Some people argue against it. Like there was only a certain window for the true of stuff of that to be made. Like some people say, like the only real punk music came out between 1977 and about 1988. Everything after that was something else. And it's kind of the same thing with film noir. Film noir started sometime in the early 30s and really had its heyday throughout the 40s. And a lot of people say that this film was the last true film noir, coming in 1958. And it is true. And again, another callback to our New Hollywood. We talked about how certain genres or subgenres got less popular while other ones picked up. Throughout the 60s, yeah, film noir was kind of dead. And then by the time it got going again, it was seen as something new, and everything to this day that has noir elements usually is now called neo-noir. And most people agree the first truly great neo-noir was Chinatown, and that was 1974. So now it's like you can set out to make a film as noir as you want now, but because of the time period, it will always be viewed as neo-noir. It'll be noir, but plus other elements, and you know that's open to debate. But in any case, it's a kind of, if you do buy into that idea, it's an interesting note for the genre to end on, because it's not a typical noir, particularly in its setting. I mean, it has all the noir elements, but you know, most of the classic noirs were set sort of around like urban decay, mostly notably in say Los Angeles or New York, that kind of thing, right? This is all taking place within a small, seedy border town on the border of the U.S. and Mexico, so kind of a different sort of setting. Yeah, instead of having sort of the oppressive backdrop of a sprawling, decaying metropolis, like a New York or Los Angeles with, all its big buildings and stuff like that. In this, we have a fairly small type of town with, wide open streets. So a very different sort of backdrop for a noir, but still considered one of the great ones. And even in the wider spectrum, it's considered one of the best crime dramas. Mm-hmm. So I'd seen this film, but it had been many years, and I'd almost forgotten I only remembered the beats. I remembered what happened, but I didn't, remember specifics like how the scenes were and stuff like that. So most of the films we're doing here, we're trying to focus on ones that he directed, and he didn't necessarily have to act in them. This one's good because it's both. He directs and acts in it. I would really, as long as we can find it, I'm really hoping we can do The Third Man, which he did not direct, but I think is his greatest acting performance. So I hope we can get that in. So it'd be a little interesting to talk about a film just from the perspective of one actor. Of course, we'll talk about everything, but I've just always thought that was such a great performance. That's 1949 in The Third Man, and that's one of the great. And his character Harry Lime is viewed as one of the great villains of cinema. Although I have to say, the character in this is also quite iconic, Hank Quinlan. And it was just sort of perfect timing, I guess, if you wanted to say about when I made the joke about him getting fat. Well, fat just fits right into this role. And he would wear the badge of fat quite proudly for the rest of his career.
He looks quite different in this film. At first, I was like, wait, is that Orson Welles? Because, he's got all kinds of facial prosthetics, and, he wasn't as fat as the character he was playing. He was, wearing like a fat suit, the equivalent or whatever.
But he would eventually, years later, he would fill out. He would have been fat enough to play it for sure. But that's true. He wasn't at peak obesity at this point. Yeah, it's true. And yeah, it's just a great performance. He really does sort of disappear into it. Particularly, it might have been shocking if you were somebody that remembered his film appearances from the 40s. If you saw him in Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons and The Stranger. In that, he's just, again, he's younger too, but also very clean cut. Now this, they do a great job of, like, he is older, but making him look even older than he is and even fatter than he is and stuff. And he even puts on kind of a voice for it, which I enjoy a lot. Because Orson Welles, he's often imitated. What's the name of that voice actor? I always forget his name. But anyway, he's the guy that does the voice of. He was he's all over the place, but maybe most notably, he was the voice of the Brain. I'm Pinky and the Brain. He's always been used for the last 20 some years to do like Orson Welles impressions and stuff. And so that sort of clear, dignified voice, and he kind of buries it in this character, and it's really good. It really shows the depth of his acting talent that he's able to do that without it sounding silly, not just him going, like Burgess Meredith doing the Penguin or something.
Right. Now that you mention it, doesn't Pinky kind of sound similar to his character in this film? Is it Pinky the one you're talking about? It's been a while since I've seen Animaniacs or whatever. It's
well, the Brain was the smart one, and Pinky was just
it's the Brain then, the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, because Pinky's the one that was had the weird accent and said "narf" and stuff like that. But if you can remember that voice, Anyway, I can't remember the name of the voice actor, even though I should. He's been all over the place and stuff, and there's been several times where he's done an animated version of Orson Welles. This film had some big star power of the day. It had Charlton Heston. And I guess what nowadays we call a very famous example of Hollywood whitewashing.
Yes.
Yes. But it's 1950. One more callback to our talk of New Hollywood. We talked about the transition, how Hollywood had been very white bread and, very waspy. And finally, by the late 60s, it got at least a little bit more ethnic, not just because you have black actors, but even just some of the white actors that wouldn't have been stars in earlier eras. A person like, a swarthy Italian like De Niro, or a small Jewish guy like Dustin Hoffman and stuff like that. So anyway, this is before all that. So you can think it sounds ridiculous to think, Charlton Heston, as a Mexican, but that was sort of the climate that
they're in Mexico for some of the film, and I don't think there's any Mexicans in the movie, are there? It's all white people. Like even the extras.
There's very few. There might be like 2 or 3 that might be maybe half Mexican. It's hard to tell.
They used
Especially
a lot
since
of
back then they weren't above using makeup to do that kind of thing.
Bronzer or whatever you call it.
So it's very hard to tell. But they go over to like a Mexican Raja Gabor, who makes an interesting little cameo in the movie. She's the madam that they talk to briefly. But yeah, Charlton Heston. So there's 2 stories about how Orson Welles came to direct this movie. There's one that Charlton Heston tells that says that after Orson had returned to Hollywood and said he was, ready to work there again if anybody wanted him, that when they were making this movie, they pegged him for the Quinlan role, but they didn't know who was going to be directing yet, and that when Heston mentioned that Welles was a good choice to be director, and that they eventually came around to it, and that Welles's condition for directing was that he get to rewrite everything. The other version is similar, but it says that Welles had been friends with a particular producer named Albert Zugsmith, who was known as the king of the B films back then, and they'd worked together before. And when he came back, he was one of the first people he contacted, and he asked him if there were any scripts going around, and he could possibly pass on to him. And he said, "Oh, I got a bunch." And Orson said something to the effect of, "Do you have like a really bad one? Because what I want to do is take a bad script and prove that I can make a great movie." And he recommended a script called Badge of Evil, which was based on some novel that was supposedly really, I guess, amateurishly and hokily written or something like that. And that Orson chose it and that he was going to direct all along. So I really don't know which story is true, but in both versions, it is true that Welles did completely rewrite the script almost from scratch. Like maybe the basic plot was still there, but everything was different. And he also had sort of a kind of a loose style when it came to the dialogue, in that he had a very collaborative effort when he talked to all the actors when they were shooting scenes. He sort of, I guess he encouraged them to improvise or change things if they felt like that's what they wanted to do. Which is, again, kind of interesting because it was a really fast film schedule. I don't remember what the shoot was, but it was short. So they got a lot done quickly, which I think was good for Welles, because by then he sort of had your reputation of, rightly or wrongly, of being flaky and not being able to get things done. And that even haunted him for the rest of his life because he had so many unfinished projects. Although I've watched some documentaries and stuff, and a lot of people that worked with him said, no, he was very focused and stuff. It wasn't his fault. A lot of the stuff that didn't get finished, it wasn't his fault. It was other things. So again, that's something we can touch on in later shows too.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that a guy with the kind of clout that he has now, he mainly wasn't as respected when he was still alive. But, to take like Spielberg, Spielberg's going to have like final cut on every project he does,
Yeah.
And this guy is like the complete opposite. All this stuff is chopped up.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Because, that kind of like climate for directors just didn't exist back then. Even the most respected ones were, they were viewed a certain way. Okay, you're a director, your job is to get the film in on time and under budget and get all the actors in line. And, for at least the first half of Welles's career, it was very seen that way. They weren't really looking at him as an artist who was trying to, bring his own creative spin into movies. Certainly that existed beforehand, but that was kind of what all these directors had to labor under. And some were just better at it than others. Welles is interesting because he was part of helping break the mold, really. We didn't mention him at the time because there were so many things to talk about. When we talked about the transition of New Hollywood and the auteur era, he was kind of a forerunner to that, in that he brought these artistic sensibilities to the role of director. And I'm sure there were plenty of the directors from that movement who were very much, motivated and influenced by somebody like Welles.
Absolutely.
And what's really, I think, like the most complimentary thing I can say about Welles is, like, he's not comparable to anybody else. He's really not, because he just did so many things. Like, he had sort of a style as a director, but then he brought all these other things to the table too, as, again, a writer, an actor, etc. And he also had so much experience in other mediums. I mean, this is a man that made a significant impact on the medium of theater, radio, and cinema. He probably would have done TV if he had the time. But he did so many things. But yeah, like it's really hard to come up with anybody that's even close to comparable to him, really, unless you're going to say, well, comparable just as a filmmaker. Maybe you can make some comparisons, but again, it's hard because over this time I've been, watching and rewatching some of the films that I've known from his oeuvre, and it is really hard to just like pin down, like, say, a completely signature style, I guess, the way you could with, I don't know, maybe this isn't the best example, but it's kind of what we know, like, say, a John Carpenter, right? Like John Carpenter films, you kind of know you're watching a John Carpenter film about 10 minutes in at least, because there's such a distinct style. Wells had a distinct style, but it was a little more fluid, and that was probably because of well, there's a lot of different elements. One is simply just how many eras he crossed over from. He started filmmaking in the early 40s and was doing it into the late 70s, which was just a very transitive time for film, as we pointed out a million times. But yeah, I really would not know. I'd be at a loss who to compare him to. In some ways, for his noir stuff like this, and actually, what's funny, this isn't even the first noir film he did. He did one in the late 40s called what was it, The Lady from Shanghai, which I haven't seen, but I'm aware of its reputation. While that is considered a noir, it's considered one of the weirdest noirs ever, with a lot of really strange stuff going on in it. So really, this movie's much more straightforward as far as noir goes. So that's something that's on my list that I want to see. But yeah, as far as, like, say, the scope of that, you can see maybe some Hitchcock, I guess, in some of the noir stuff, because Hitchcock was good at, crime drama and thrillers too. So you can see a little bit of parallel there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to find someone that's been as successful in those different, areas. Like, I was thinking, like, maybe Scorsese, because he's done a lot of stuff with music.
That's true.
Done lots of music videos, and I was thinking, like, maybe James Cameron, because he's had lots of other projects, like how he went down to see the Titanic, in the submarine and stuff. I just kind of brainstorming, but yeah, in those fields, yeah, definitely no one was nearly as successful as him in all of those.
Yeah, and he was just always restless and ambitious ever since he was little. So he was just never really satisfied with anything sort of in the moment.
Mm-hmm. It's a common trait for the successful directors, I think.
Right. And I think that's another reason why he was often misunderstood.
Oh, right.
Like, where they think that he wasn't in the moment, or that he didn't care about whatever project he was working on now, that he was always thinking ahead. He was always thinking ahead, but I mean, I still think he was obviously very present, because the quality holds up. And again, we realize how collaborative films are, and you can't just say the success of any film has to do entirely with the director. There's a lot of other things that have to go right and stuff. But I mean, as our focus here is on the director, you got to give him the credit for just how well done and how innovative a lot of his movies were. Now, this is just more of a theory of mine, but of course, one of the most famous technical aspects of this movie that gets talked about over and over again, and you'll see it always when you go to film schools, they talk about a long take. This movie opens with one of those famous long takes in film history. It's about 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
I was so captivated by that opening sequence. Like, first of all, I didn't realize they were doing crane stuff back then,
It's definitely got to be one of the first uses of it, right?
It's so well done. And I was just thinking, like, that's a studio, that's like a neighbor, like that's a studio set right there, but it's like a neighborhood type, how they have their, makeshift, neighborhoods and stuff around the studio. But it was
examples I can think of, not just being a long take, but one of those things. It's more common now in movies, but back then, of where a director really has like to, guide the camera, whatever the focus, but also there's just a lot of other stuff going on in the background,
right,
and how it's all timed to the same second. Back when we did in our Masters of Film one, when we were doing Truffaut, that film, what the hell was it called? Suddenly I can't remember. But anyway, the Truffaut film, there's a moment, because it's about making a film, there's a moment where they're showing sort of one of those shots and everything goes into it. You see the director, cueing the people, saying, okay, you walk in at this moment and this car comes here and stuff like that. I can't, for the life of me, remember what the name of the film was. But anyway, I think of that. It's kind of interesting. But again, that was That was the 70s, and that was a little more common. But it was an interesting look into seeing, just how hands-on the director has to get and how many details are going on, because it's all sort of timed down to the last second. So like the camera's going to sweep in here. Okay, we have this couple walking in the background. They're talking. The red car is going to pull up and stop. I don't know. The birds are going to fly across here. I feel like this is one of the first really great examples of that kind of shot. Day for night, by the way.
Yeah, I was looking it up too.
Yeah, it was day for night. But anyway, so it makes me think of that too. So yeah, it's just it's a shot that's been talked about, for decades, and rightly so, and probably at least sometimes slightly imitated.
Like, I can't imagine this being considered a B movie, a B film when you see that opening sequence, because it's so well done.
Right, and that's again sort of a hallmark of Welles, in that he would elevate things.
Right.
Like he's elevating something maybe seen as more trashy or more simple and straightforward, but he's putting it through his lens of his innovation and quality, and he's raising it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did that across a few other genres too, which again we'll get to explore in greater detail as we do more films. But yeah, really cool opening shot, because at first it seems to follow the car, but then it changes focus, and you're really kind of not sure what you're supposed to be following. And then, then it comes together where the car and the couple walking to it, you find out they're both the focus. The whole point is sort of merging them. It starts with the action leading up to the car. Then as the car gets stopped for the second time, the couple comes into play, and it's like, oh, now we're going to follow the couple, but then the car catches up. And then we realize it's a merging, how they're both part of what happened, because the couple is two of our main characters, and the car, of course, is what kicks off the action of this movie with the explosion scene off screen, actually, a little right after that. There's a moment there that makes me think sort of the old Hollywood, and sort of like the way women were written, though. Because literally, we have Charlton Heston, the Mexican, and his American wife, Janet Leigh, and they get to cross first because everybody knows who he is. He's a well-known, I think he's a prosecutor.
Right.
And the couple waiting in the car are held up for a minute, and then they're like, okay, you go on. And then they go, and then they're only a few feet away when it explodes. And Janet Leigh goes, "What just happened?" And he tells her exactly what happened. I'd be like, what kind of idiot are you? He goes, that car that we just saw, it blew up. What? How could she not have known? Like, how stupid do you think she is? Like, there was an explosion, and I'm such a stupid, frail woman that it all went out of my head. Like, it happened 2 seconds ago. You just saw this car.
Well, we need the exposition. Like we need it explained to the audience. So,
yeah. Even though, like, there's nothing that takes that place in between. It's not like anything. It goes directly from them being together to the explosion off screen. I don't know how there could be any confusion on the audience's part. But just in case, it's like, have Janet Leigh ask a really dumb question so he can explain it or mansplain whatever, to her. It's like, well, that car that we just saw 2 seconds ago, it blew up. That's why there's fire and noise and yelling anyway. I just think that's kind of a funny quirk.
He's got to come off of his honeymoon to go start this investigation. Right.
So yeah, I haven't seen a ton of noirs, but it's kind of a different setup. A lot of noirs have stuff to do with PIs, most notably. Not that they always have to be, but Philip Noirs like that, played by like Cagney and what's his name? Well, I was talking about him last show, now I can't think of his name. Bogart, that kind of thing. This is a little different in that we've got, as more main characters. Usually in a lot of those noirs, you have the cops and stuff, but they're not the main. They're kind of like to the side. They come in and they do stuff, kind of like even in modern stuff, like when we saw Brick, right? Like the cops are there, but they're not important to the story.
Right.
And this, the focus is on the cops and actually one prosecutor that just gets caught up in the case because of jurisdictional reasons, which is kind of interesting too. They talk about, the complications of having, it is interesting. It's a crime. So the bomb was placed in the car on Mexican soil, but it went off on American soil. So
right.
You can see how that's a jurisdictional complication. It's a little bit interesting. It's funny now with the state of what they're saying, all this stuff about the Mexican border nowadays and immigration and a wall and everything. He makes an interesting point, like in 1958, saying, he's like, this is an open border of 1,400 miles. There's no machine gun nests or anything like that. He's like, it's a complicated thing. And it's like all these years later, it's like, yeah, still very complicated. I'm not going to say a lazy thing like the more things change, the more they stay the same, but kind of, right? A little bit. I mean, that ran through my mind.
Yeah, I didn't think of it like that, but yeah, you have a point.
It is kind of a lazy thing, but at the same time, in a very general way, I think it applies. But yeah, I don't really like it when people make sort of absolute statements like that, especially historical things like history is doomed, like history repeating itself and stuff like that. It's like history is complicated; it doesn't repeat itself. It's different every time. There's similarities, but it's different. But anyway, I'm not going to get on my high horse about historical stuff right now. But yeah, so this one, the focus is very much on the investigation, actually from the cops' point of view. And you have an interesting, and as we said, we have an interesting element thrown in it that there's also like an American lawyer, and then there's the Mexican lawyer who's not really part of it per se, but gets caught up in it. So you have that bent, and you get sort of to see the machinations of the system at work or whatever. And it is sort of interesting, and you see how unconventional our the character played by Welles is right off the bat, because when he comes in and he takes over the scene, like he starts doing stuff that really confuses Heston, because they're saying, okay, well, aren't you? It's like, here's the daughter of. Remember, they bring in the daughter of the guy that got killed to identify the body, and they're like, we've got her here, chief, or whatever. And he's like, okay, whatever, let her go. I'm like, you don't want to question her? He's like, she doesn't know anything.
Yeah,
So he has his own way of doing things, and everybody around him is very used to it. While Charlton Heston's character, Vargas, is kind of mystified. So you have that vibe going throughout the movie, and that he can't believe that this kind of like sloppy, annoying, this sloppy, abrupt guy is basically the letter of the law around here, and everybody seems to like him and admire him, despite that he seems to have a really weird approach to the job that doesn't seem very professional at certain times. But
right. Well, it all comes to make sense eventually. His approach.
His approach comes to make sense eventually, for sure.
And
but
I can't get over Heston playing a Mexican guy. It's
I know.
You wouldn't know. I mean, he's got the little mustache, I guess, which gives it away. But you wouldn't know if his name wasn't Vargas.
Yeah.
But,
just the fact that they keep saying that he's Mexican, right? Like when they have the other guy, he's like, "Look, I know that you want to defend your countrymen and all this stuff." He's like, "This is over in your country" and stuff like that. It just sounds ridiculous. It's like two white guys with the same accent talking at each other, and he's saying, "You're a," And there's a few times later where Quinlan is, refers to him as the Mexican and stuff. Did you find a guy that was less Mexican? Like this is right up there with what's his name? The Duke.
John Wayne.
John Wayne, when he played Genghis Khan, for Christ's sake. Yeah, and this is 50s Hollywood, people. We realize it wasn't perfect, but, it's pretty funny in retrospect.
Yeah, Heston said that not doing the accent was the biggest mistake he ever made in his career. Can you imagine if he was doing an accent? That would be even worse.
It probably would have, You really think that's going to make it more believable? And I bet I don't think he would have been able to do it well,
Essay?
I don't know though, because I always think of like one of my favorite movies, even though it's a super flawed movie that I enjoy the hell out of, and it's weird because it's weird because I love the movie, and yet the worst part about the movie is the lead character, which should really sink a movie, and that's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yeah,
I just think of him. What's his name? Baseball guy.
Costner.
Yeah, Kevin Costner, and like his complete like non-attempt at even trying to like sound in any way English or British or whatever as Robin Hood. He's like, what? I'm Robin Hood. Everybody else around me can do the accents, but I won't. I'm Robin Hood. I spent some time in the Middle East, so it muddled my accent. I have no idea how he justified it, but
it never works that way. It's always like the Brits doing like really great American accents. But you don't really hear a lot of Americans doing a good British accent.
Yeah, there certainly have been some exceptions and stuff, but you gotta love Costner just not even attempting it and like sticking out like a sore thumb in the movie. Because you even had for God's sakes, I can't remember anybody's name today. Even Christian Slater is trying to do an accent in the movie. Is it good? Not really, but I at least appreciate that he's trying. Because, Christian Slater is not exactly what you would think of as a great example of an American actor that could do accents. No, not really at all. His accent is actually quite painful, but anyway. But yeah, I didn't hear that about Heston, but it's funny that I wonder like if they tried it out on set a few times and then they were just like, no.
I'm sure that's what happened with Kevin Costner. They were like, okay, we cannot do this, Kevin. That's terrible. Just talk normally.
I'm Robin Hood. I rob from the rich and give to the poor. It's like you sound like a soccer hooligan.
You sound like one of the Beatles.
Yeah. That is true. That for a whole generation, like that particular like Liverpool accent was like all like Americans knew about. Like
right. They all talk like that, like really, really harsh.
It's like it's loosely in the sky, no diamonds though. Help us, help us. Oh no, I'm Ringo. Oh man. So yeah, so this movie's kicked off with a car bomb explosion. You find out the victim, and plus he was with like a stripper or whatever, but it was like sort of a well-known business guy. He was like, what was he? He owned a construction company or something like that around there. And what's funny is like that's what kicks it off, and everything's about. And then when you come around to like, you know, the how that what's the word I'm looking for? The resolution of the case. It's all very bland and boring. It's like, oh, it's the guy they thought it was, you know, and it was for very boring, exactly what you thought reasons. The guy was really great at, you know, for lying for a while though. Like he was being super sarcastic and flipping out and indignant about it, and then you find out, oh, it actually was him. Which is kind of funny. Although I guess that is true to life a lot of the times. I was thinking, because there's a lot of times you can think of like high profile like cases and stuff where they deny and it's so theatrical and it's like, well, yeah, and then like later they're like, okay, yeah, it was me. Yeah, that's kind of what's going on in this case. Because what was it? It was yeah, the guy's daughter had secretly married this Mexican, and not only was he a Mexican, but he was like he worked at like a shoe store or something like that. So it was just like, you know, you knew he wouldn't approve of the marriage, so it's like we bumped him off, you know, for that reason. You know, it's just cut and dry kind of as the case comes, but yet because of the circumstances and the characters caught up with it, we get all this cool extra drama. So that's kind of a neat thing in that like the crux of the movie is a very simple, straightforward case, but then you get like all this extra stuff that's what makes the story notable. I think what struck me again about the movie when I saw it again was like, you're probably maybe not prepared for how dark it actually is going to get, because it takes a while. Like you're over an hour in before like things get really sort of dark and sinister, and you're like, holy shit, like look what they're going to do to the guy's wife, you know, and stuff like that. Because I mean, I think because of regulations and stuff in Hollywood, and we talked about the Hays Code and all that stuff and how they had to change things during New Hollywood, we were used to a certain level of what was acceptable in movies to show or even to intonate and not actually say, but maybe just imply and stuff like that. So sometimes when you see a movie that's older, you know, this movie's about 60 years old, believe it or not, you know, it can come across kind of surprising when you realize just how dark the subject matter can actually get. Because when you start to see the depths of Quinlan's, how low Quinlan can sink in his attempt to do this, you know, he's upset that Vargas is basically hassling him for doing what he always does, which has always gotten results. And it's implied towards the end. Now we don't know this for sure, but I tend to believe him when he says like all those guys like he like planted evidence on or whatever like that, they were guilty. I figure that's probably true. Like I don't think he really was setting up innocent guys. I think he just realized, you know, it's a dirty world, and I had to sink lower down to get it done. And that's what happens here. So in his pursuit of doing that and being annoyed that this outsider has come in and questioned it, he's ready to just like put the pedal to the metal to discredit this guy. It's like, okay, well, I'll make this deal with this low little criminal to like shoot his wife up full of drugs, and then I'll betray that guy and murder the guy and have him be in the same room as the wife. Like, holy shit, man, you're really willing to go the extra mile.
It really walked a tight line, you know, for the ratings, because they didn't have like it was like a lesbian scene, or it kind of implied that they were lesbians, and then drug use also.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so it's pretty edgy for its time.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus, this is all speculation, but I know that people have speculated about like what we don't really see. It's like, well, you know, maybe they molested her too while they were putting her out. You know, it's a good crowd of guys, and you do have that line from one of the two women that's like, "I want to stay and watch." So it's like, It sounds like they're going to do more than just maybe shoot her up with something. Maybe they're going to do something else. So again, very dark implications there. Very serious. So it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I mean that would be like if they did a modern day adaptation. It would like
Sure.
have a full on like rape scene that they would probably show like a good bit of it.
Mm.
Different times.
Sure. But nowadays, I think they would have a lot of trouble showing it really because of the racial setting, right? It's like, oh, this white woman getting like gang raped by Mexicans. Again, they don't look Mexican in the movie, but they're supposed to be Mexicans, right?
Yeah, I keep forgetting they're supposed to be Mexicans.
Exactly. You don't think that. But now it's just like, yeah, imagine a movie comes out with that now. It would.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like that never happens or
right.
has never happened in the history of time. But I'm just saying because of the politically charged climate and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's kind of unfortunate, isn't it? Because I mean, you're not making like a statement on the.
I know, but now everything seems to be interpreted that way, which is very sad. Yeah, if you have anything, it's always some sort of statement about it. It's like, no, I'm just telling a story. This is what happens to happen in the story. But when you have an element of, say, race or sexuality thrown in, well, then it obviously becomes all about that, which again, is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess whenever you have a rape scene in general, you get that, but we're like you said, telling a story here that this stuff happens in real life, all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. And people talk about like when you're dealing with something that's sensitive, like a tasteful way of doing it. I don't know if there always is a tasteful way. How tasteful can you make like a gang rape, or say like people have heard me flip out on this, and maybe they wonder if I have something against children. How I talk about how sometimes children are needlessly protected in movies where it doesn't even make sense. And like you said, in the real world, children do get molested or even killed and stuff like that. I'm not saying, I want a bunch of exploitative movies that show this.
Right.
I'm just saying it's annoying sometimes when it makes sense plot-wise and they back away with it or come up with a Deus Ex Machina to explain it away or something like that.
Right. I really like when films actually do go that extra mile when it is necessary to show that, because it's necessary in the plot. I'm not saying big gratuitous about it, but
right. And again, that's what the line comes down to, not being exploitative or gratuitous, and coming back to the argument of being tasteful. Well, it is a tough thing, but I just get annoyed sometimes when it's overdone the other way, because like I said, sometimes in movies they'll have like all this death and destruction.
Right.
But if children come along, they won't even be put in danger. Like even child endangerment makes like some of the audience and people nervous. And sure, of course, but I mean, it also shows that everybody has like really weird perceptions about I don't know, things like death and stuff like that. Everybody seems to have a scale. I'm not going to go on a thing about here, but apparently, like men are like and again, I'm no men's rights activist. I don't give a shit. I hate those people. They're insane. But clearly, in the world of cinema, men are the most disposable things out there. You can do anything to a man in a movie. You can gang rape him, and it might even be played for laughs. Honestly, like, and you blow them away and stuff like that. But once you start introducing the element of women or children and stuff, then it becomes a whole thing. And okay, whatever. We don't have the time to go down that road. But
didn't Siskel and Ebert have a big problem with kids getting killed in films?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, we've talked about them multiple times in the show, and as much as I respect a lot of things about them, I think they sometimes had like these weird set in stone views that don't work in the world of being an objective critic.
Exactly. Objective
like the way they would just object to certain even just genres and stuff. Like I think we talked about before. Like you can't watch, say, a Citizen Kane and then watch a slasher and try to judge them on the same merits. It's it's ridiculous to try to.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not a particular big fan of musicals, so I'm not going to go and review a bunch of musical films because it's not something that I particularly enjoy. So,
right. But even if you could admit it, you would be smart enough to at least realize that, like, you'd be like, well, I don't really care for it. But you can't say this movie is stupid because everybody starts singing.
Exactly.
Because that's what that's what musicals are. Maybe you don't particularly like it, but you have to accept the premise that that's how musicals are built, right?
My whole review is just complaining about the singing. Then they start singing again. Damn it!
It doesn't make any sense. And where's this music coming from? You know. And sometimes, yeah, I feel like they did kind of the other thing with other genres in, say, like with a Siskel and Ebert, where I'm just like, well, again, you have to accept a certain premise here, or it's not going to work, or the framework that the movie's, built upon, etc. But yeah, so this movie is fairly edgy, things shown and things implied. I really do like the title, Touch of Evil and stuff, because I think really what the movie's about is just showing how three-dimensional characters can be, and makes it not about a lot of what we see back then and in new movies too, where it's really black and white, the good guys and the bad guys in this. Because we get the idea that Quinlan wasn't always this way. He was very respected, particularly by the guy the other cop he winds up shooting towards the end. Like he kind of idolized him and looked up to him. Who is that? What is his name? Why is his name so far down? He was one of the main characters. Menzies. Menzies was the other cop that he winds up shooting at the end. Like his whole life, he looked up to him. You get the idea that Quinlan was a good cop for probably a long time, and then he even talks about like how he got beaten down. He's like 30 years on this job, and there's no the pay is terrible, and there's no respect, and there's no gratitude or anything, and all this stuff. You see like a man that had gotten beaten down over time, and I like how he's not apologetic for anything and stuff like that, because when he's talking about like how many of these guys did you frame, like how many, he's like it was like they were guilty, like I really like that. And I mean, maybe it gets a little overly symbolic with his death, but I really like it, this idea that him dying in like the muddy water, sinking down into the muck of the world he sort of created around himself. It's that kind of thing, right, where you have this, you're somebody who's supposed to be like righteous and good, and you're in an environment of like graft and corruption and overall crime and stuff, and the idea is like the only way I can fight it is to sink down into it. Yeah, I think this movie's that's been done in a lot of movies, but I think this is really well done in this movie. And again, I really give full credit to Welles' performance, and that Quinlan, as much as he's this cantankerous bastard with all these negative traits, he still comes across as somewhat sympathetic to me. You really feel like here's a man that kind of just got broken by the world around him, and in some ways he's not even wrong. It's just the way he went about things was wrong. Like, and as they said, the great irony when the film was over is this latest frame job thing of having the guy plant the evidence all turned out to be unnecessary because the guy confessed,
right?
And they got him anyway.
Yep. Sticks of dynamite in the shoebox.
The old dynamite in the shoebox bit. The oldest time. But,
what was it like? There's 10 sticks in a roll or whatever in a pack, and they used 8 on the car.
Something like that. It's something like that, about how there were 2 left over.
Yeah. Here they are. We found them.
Yeah. I wonder where he really did hide it then. If there were, or maybe there weren't any left over. In any case, he really did do it. So I guess the dynamite they planted had nothing to do with the crime. But in any case, justice was served, but in a really weird roundabout way with a lot of unnecessary suffering in the middle.
Yeah.
And isn't that a lot like life?
Yep. It's all a euphemism for life.
Another thing that he, rightly or wrongly, is known for, and I was talking about him being trope codifier, various labels and stuff, is he's definitely sort of seen as the patron saint of the large ham. But that wasn't always particularly because of the way he acted in movies. It was more him in real life. Actually, as an actor, he was very earnest and believable. It was the big ham stuff, the large ham stuff was more just him in real life being himself, which is kind of funny. And I think that gets lost. And I can remember, I hadn't seen this movie in many years, and I was watching it again today to see it, and I was thinking, like, how embarrassing are the scenes between him and Heston going to be? But they weren't. They were actually played very well. Because, I had that sort of bias in my mind. And it is true that a lot of movies, I really don't like Heston. I feel like Heston drags out a lot of his movies with his overacting.
I agree.
Because he came from an era where everybody kind of did it, but I always felt like he stood on top of he was even worse at it. I don't know. Like I always felt like Charles, even though he's not very believable as a Mexican, this is one of the few times where at least I felt like Charlton Heston wasn't just playing Charlton Heston, which is kind of what he does in a lot of his most famous roles, where it's just like, and there's Charlton Heston, you know, beating his chest and yelling at everybody and whatever.
Damn dirty ape.
Yes. So yeah, I've known some people that were huge Charlton Heston fans, and I was always mystified. I was like, why? But then again, I mean, I get it. Some people don't really like, you know, say like understand why I like Harrison Ford so much, and they're like, he's just Harrison Ford over and over again. I'm like, no, he's not. He's doing different stuff, but you know, maybe so. Maybe.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like you said though. That was a kind of a. That's the way they acted in those days, was overacting.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily like Heston as an actor, but I like a lot of films that he's done.
I like a lot of films he's done. I often feel like he's kind of the weak point in the movie. Yeah. And and coming into this movie, I thought, is that going to be the case in this one? And really, no. I mean, you could always say, well, it's unfortunate that they had him playing a Mexican guy. But again, as we said, the time was what it was. You know? Obviously, if the movie came out now, it would be a real Mexican person.
I mean, there were no Mexican actors, you know?
Yeah.
They didn't let them work.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Desi Arnaz or something is like the only thing I can think of that, you know, would have been a Latino.
Yeah. Is that the guy that played Ricky?
Yeah. And was it I Love Lucy? I think it was I Love
Lucy. Yeah, I Love Lucy. Yeah.
What year was that?
That was the 50s.
So we're starting to get a little bit of color in Hollywood. But I think that was like her real life husband, right? So
yeah, I think so.
So that's probably how she was able to get him on the show.
Oh yeah, that's true. He was like the little speck of color, like the sea of like white bread that was like American television and film, like in the 50s.
Yeah.
But as we say, it all starts small and it branches out. But I mean, at least one, even if they weren't able to cast properly for the movie, at least one good thing about the movie is that it shows sort of both sides. We have the bad guy Mexican characters. We also have Vargas as a very virtuous Mexican character. So it's not like just trying to paint everybody with the same brush. It's trying to show good guys, bad guys. And again, the movie's less about good guys and bad guys and more, I think, about how people have different sides to them. I mean, Quinlan, it's mostly about Quinlan, and it is true the other ones are more, okay, they're good, they're bad and stuff. But you see some of the strife in between, like I said, with the guy whose name I keep forgetting, because he's so loyal to Quinlan, and then he feels so betrayed when he finds out that for many years Quinlan had been basically a dirty cop, and that he'd been helping him. So you see some of that struggle come out, and how upset he is, and how it's made him question his convictions, et cetera, et cetera. But it's too bad that Janet Leigh isn't. She's kind of a prop in the movie, which is a little unfortunate.
I feel like any blonde could have just sat there and played her role.
Yeah, I mean, Janet Leigh was a big star, but she doesn't have much to do in this movie, like we said, except maybe be a victim and cause some exposition to happen. It's not a huge complaint, because I'm not one of those people that's like, it's terrible showing women as victims, because it comes back to our earliest thing. Well, guess what? Women often are victims. We're not saying it's great or amazing, but that's often the case in many things. But it's just a little, she doesn't get to do very much except just sort of be a victim in the movie. You feel so bad. She's at the hotel that's controlled by gangsters.
Yeah.
And that one really weird guy, that's kind of the weirdest thing. That almost took me out of the movie. That one guy, he wasn't part of the gang. He was just there. And he was so odd. Was he borderline mentally retarded? He just kept repeating things. And if I was in that situation, if I was Heston's character, I would have strangled the life out of that guy. You show up and you're just like, where's my wife? And it's like, oh, well, there was nobody here. And he doesn't give any straight answers. And he goes off on little tangents, babbling. He's like, and he kept saying that thing I'm not going to, if they think I'm going to do that, they've got another thing coming. I would probably murder that guy in frustration because he was so annoying. But yeah, that guy was I don't know what his deal was. So he was the one guy that wasn't part of the Mexican gang that just happened to work at the motel, or I don't know. But he was so annoying. And I was so disappointed that he wound up being that, because at first he's just driving her in the car, and then you find out he works here too, and then there's a whole scene with him and Vargas. I don't know. But yeah, he was played by Dennis Weaver. Who was he? Just called Night Manager. He was the Night Manager. Anyway, he was so annoying. But yeah, I couldn't figure it out. Like, was he supposed to be like something wrong with him mentally, or they were just, well, what in the 50s, so you would have called somebody who's a little slow.
Yeah, yeah.
It was so aggravating. I don't know if that was their idea of having a comedic element, but to me, it wasn't funny. It was annoying, but no big deal. Just looking at the placement of this movie. So yeah, over in Europe, he'd done a low-budget version of Macbeth, and then so two Shakespeare adaptations, and then the Othello thing that took all that time. 55, he did called Mr. One of my favorite movies by him that maybe we'll do, I'm not sure, which was 1962's The Trial, the adaptation of the book by Franz Kafka, which I think is a really great adaptation of a really interesting novel. It's one of my favorite novels, an unfinished novel. So that kind of doesn't that fit perfectly with somebody like for him to do. He's a guy that, like, when he died, had so many unfinished projects. And one of his movies was based on a famous unfinished novel. But that's one of my favorite examples of casting. Was for that the main character in that, Joseph K, was played by Anthony Perkins, which, if you know the book, it just fits so well. This would have been just a couple years after he did Psycho. Not that Joseph K is like a psycho or anything like that. In fact, the whole point, he's kind of sort of an everyman character. But the world, they do a really great job of creating the world that Kafka brings up, like something kind of like Brazil, only 10 times more oppressive. And he just seems like the perfect character to be raging against that. So maybe we'll do that. I don't know. But yeah, so that's the movie he did after this. That was a few years later. But yeah, this for me, this really began where he did his sort of his more interesting stuff. Not that his most famous movie, his first one, Citizen Kane, isn't interesting, and I am interested in The Magnificent Ambersons simply because it was the first thing he did after that, and it's one of those movies that seems to have gone through a bunch of reevaluations. It's like, oh well, it wasn't really that good, or it's like, it was actually really good, but the studio ruined it.
Yeah.
Sort of an endless debate going there. And a few weeks ago, when I was just looking for Welles films in general, I watched The Stranger because it's the easiest one to find, because actually it's part of the public domain. And The Stranger, while a well-done movie, it just really doesn't make any impression on me. It's kind of bland. It does have some Welles touches in it, and he plays the villain in that too, but I would even argue he's kind of like not too memorable in that either. That movie, by the way, people don't know, it came out in 1946, so it's pretty timely because it's about a guy who was a Nazi war criminal that was being hunted after World War II, and he managed to escape to America, and he was living sort of undercover. He'd married an American woman. He was trying to just, live a life, and it's all about, how they're trying to track him down and find him, and Welles plays that character. But I don't know, it's pretty straightforward, by the numbers movie that's pretty boring, really. Like, it's fine, but I don't think there's anything particularly good about it, except perhaps that character's super over the top death, because it all ends in like a confrontation of the city's like clock, like really elaborate clock tower, and it's one of those clock towers that has like the little vista thing, or platform thing out in front where like a character runs along on a track.
Oh yeah.
And I think in this one it's like a night or something. Anyway, I don't know. So he's up in there, and there's a confrontation, and he gets shot a couple times, and he like crashes through where the clock face is just at the time when the hour is struck. So the little character comes out, and it impales him on its like sword, and then he like falls to his death. It's like a super over the top elaborate death.
Wow.
Which is pretty funny. But apart from that, the movie's, I think is pretty ho-hum. Again, it was the last financially successful movie he would ever direct. But just not really particularly interesting film. What's funny about that, and here's something I meant to say when we were talking about the original tracking shot. It's just a theory on my part. Was like, I mean, obviously we talked about how he was very artistic, so obviously the tracking shot was very important to him. But part of me wonders if he got the idea because he had actually started doing long takes in The Stranger. the movie's filled with long takes, although they aren't particularly artfully done. They're kind of just, characters talking, stuff like that. And I found out the reason The Stranger is full of long takes was because he was, after what happened with Ambersons, he was terrified of the studio cutting it up. So he thought the more long takes he did, the more difficult it would be for them to edit. So part of me wonders if that was part of the inspiration or carried over into doing the famous long take here. It's like, hey, I could do something really special and interesting with a long take, because it seems like originally his plan for long takes had less to do with doing anything artistic and more to do with doing what he could to defy the editors from cutting stuff out. Because again, he was absolutely horrified and mortified by what the studio had done to the Magnificent Ambersons. And I guess that stayed with him for the rest of his career, and was a big reason why eventually he went over to Europe, and why so many of his projects wound up being unfinished. Because in Europe, it was very difficult for him to get backing, and instead of having, say, big studios behind him, he had to get independent producers. So a lot of his movies were, they had several independent producers, and it's one of the reasons why, even when they might have been finished, there was a lot of legal trouble in deciding who actually owned the rights to it, which is something that affected The Other Side of the Wind, which I think is what we're probably going to end on, because that's really what kind of kicked this off for me. Was The Other Side of the Wind got released on Netflix after all these years. They cobbled together sort of a finished version, and I'm really interested to see it. The Other Side of the Wind is one of his many long unfinished projects. He spent a lot of the 70s filming it, and it just never seemed to get anywhere. So I'm interested to see what exactly they put together. But also on Netflix, coming out at the same time, was a documentary about Orson Welles called They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which is very much about him and his career, but really focuses on The Other Side of the Wind, which is really what made me think about Orson Welles again. I thought, hey, yeah, we could do a couple shows on him, and brought us to where we are now.
Yeah, it really became a trademark. Those long tracking shots really became a trademark for a lot of the more popular directors, or considered the masters, the current masters of film,
right?
Like
I think
Brian De Palma and maybe Paul Thomas Anderson, someone like that.
Very much so. I think it'd be hard to name at least a notable director of the last 30, 40 years who didn't want to do something like Orson Welles at some point. Right. They're like, I want to do that thing that Orson Welles did in this movie. Yeah. I think that's very much, Hitchcock's kind of another sort of similar guy too. It's like, oh, how Hitchcock had that thing, I want to do, De Palma was a huge Hitchcock man, and several of his movies just sort of basically just directly ape Hitchcock's style, which I don't mind because I think it's well done. But
well, that generation, the young guys in the 70s, they grew up watching that stuff, the Wells and Hitchcock, so that's who they probably idolized.
No, absolutely.
Those guys. I actually learned a lot about what I know about Orson Welles from Peter Bogdanovich. They
were friends, and he was a big part of The Other Side of the Wind.
Oh, really?
I think it originated with him. He was the first person he told about, and a lot of the people that were in Bogdanovich's circle, as we've talked about, kind of that group of people during the New Hollywood era, that was kind of Orson Welles' into that world. Mm-hmm. So he was by the 70s, he was kind of part of that, even though he was separate from it, but he was also part of it. And Bogdanovich was kind of his in, which is really interesting.
Like at the end of his life, really. I mean, the end of his career and his life.
Yeah, because I can't remember if Bogdanovich was supposed to be in the movie, or if the young director was based on him. Because the idea was there was an old director and a young director. The old director was based directly on Welles, and it's played by his good friend, the actual director, John Huston. And then there's a younger director representing the new thing. And I don't remember if Bogdanovich played him or not, or if somebody else was playing him, but it was based on Bogdanovich. It was sort of about the two eras sort of meeting, the old school and the new.
That's interesting.
But yeah, he was great friends with Bogdanovich.
Trying to think of what's the Bogdanovich film that has Jack Ritter in it, or John Ritter, and his his wife that died. They all laughed. It's kind of similar because John Ritter was basically playing Peter Bogdanovich in that film too. That was his character.
Yeah.
So it's yet another film that
John Ritter might have even been in some way connected to The Other Side of the Wind. I can't remember. I think his name at least came up. It's interesting. It's something I never knew that much about John Ritter. I mean, the movies he's been in weren't that good, but like at least back then he was touted as a huge talent.
Uh-huh.
People like loved him and thought he was going to do great things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he didn't exactly, but
well, I mean, the guy's got to work. He does Three's Company and kind of gets lumped into like a TV actor, kind of, group. So not really appreciated for his, genuine talent.
Very much so.
But I actually like Three's Company, so unlike a lot of people.
I like Three's Company. I like it okay. I mean, it got super repetitive after a while, as far as I could tell. There's only so many sex jokes they could make. But I liked it.
I know I've told you before. It always used to come on, and my parents would watch the the reruns, and I always watched it like when I was a young kid, and I never got the fact that he was a gay man. I never understood
pretending to be a gay man.
Right. Yeah. Playing a gay guy for the to get the to where they could all live together in the same place, because it wasn't socially acceptable for a young man and two young single women to live together.
Right.
I just thought it's kind of funny. I just like all of that comedy was wasted on me. He had to kind of be effeminate and stuff.
Yeah, I can't remember how old I was when I first. The show was long off the air by the time I was watching it, and I knew it was older. Like there were certain shows I watched, say in the early '90s, that were from the '70s, and I was aware they were older.
Yeah,
but
I watched a lot of that old stuff, like when Nick at Night first came out. Watched a lot of the old like '50s sitcoms.
No, I never got to see anything that old. Like Dick Van Dyke Show or anything. I never saw full episodes of anything that old. It wasn't until probably about 15 years ago that I saw some of those more famous ones from not all of them, but when they had like some special channels like Deja Vu and stuff. I'd watch episodes of like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and stuff from the 60s and stuff like that. And
they don't hold up well.
They don't hold up. They're pretty simplistic and I mean, they have some memorable moments, I'm sure, and stuff, but no, they don't hold up too well.
But
Three's Company, trying to remember exactly the circumstances. I can't remember. What's funny is I remember the opening better than any episodes. I can remember being quite young and watching that opening and the riding on the bike and the stupid song and all that. I remember that very well. Maybe I just watched that and then changed the channel. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe that's what I did.
Probably so, yeah.
Probably the weirdest older thing that I watched in the early '90s as a kid, and not really knowing what it was or understanding it, was on YTV for some reason. I watched the normal YTV shows of the early '90s and stuff like that, but for whatever reason, there were two, and one was fine. One of the older shows that they used to play on YTV was Get Smart, and I watched Get Smart, and I liked that, and I knew it was older stuff. But the other older, not quite as old, was they used to show episodes of I think between 75 and 79, that era of Doctor Who.
Oh.
So after shows I watched, like random episodes of Doctor Who would come on. They were very intricate and they were very plotted. You had to know what happened in the last episode to know what the fuck was going on in this one. And I just sort of watched them, and I had no clue, but I used to watch it. Yeah. But I did not at any time grasp what the hell was going on in that show. But for whatever reason, it was part of the time slot on YTV. I have no idea why. Because at that time, Doctor Who, it kept going, right? Like every time it stopped, it was never for very long. It would pick up again. Like there were more recent episodes of Doctor Who. Doctor Who happened in the 80s, but this seemed to be a specific 4 or 5 season window with a specific doctor that they had access to. Maybe it was a legal thing. It was only that era. I'll have to look it up and see. It was only the 3rd or 4th Doctor or something like that. Anyway, and that used to come on, and I used to watch it and just be completely baffled by it, but I also could not look away. So.
Still making Doctor Who to this day.
Yeah, exactly, and it's only gotten more complicated, I'm sure. What are they on, the 12th Doctor? I think they're on a female Doctor now.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't really... I've watched a season or two, along the way, but I haven't really paid a lot of attention.
Sure. But anyway, getting back to this film, as we maybe we didn't say it on the show, this film also suffered from executive meddling. So it was, again, a disappointing return for Welles, because he'd finally come back after being gone for about a decade, and he'd made this movie, and it was a pretty good movie. And once again, it got messed up, and so the version that is mostly available now that most people watch is considered more the definitive version, and it's about something like an hour and 45 or an hour and 48 minutes or something long. But back in 1958, it was cut down to something like 95, 97 minutes. And of course, not only was Welles, of course, not happy about it, but he was also really baffled by it, because this time he couldn't even fathom the reasoning behind the cuts they made. Like, it didn't make any sense to him. And I'm sure, like, having watched the movie just recently, I can't imagine cutting that much out of it and having the story still make sense. So that's kind of crazy to think of. And then in 1976, they released another version that finally added some of the footage back, but not as much. And then in the 90s was what's known as the more definitive version, and the one that Jay and I have watched. So, it was kind of like more of the same for poor Welles. He came back executive. There was re-editing. There were even scenes that were shot by other directors. I don't know if that was happening.
Yeah,
anyway, it failed. It failed at the box office, and that proved to be the last time that Welles did a Hollywood movie. For the rest of his life, he would go back to the European formula that he had. He has a quote, something like, I always loved Hollywood. It just never reciprocated.
Yeah, so he was fired off of this film. Is that right? He was fired, and then where's his name? Harry Keller was hired to do some of the reshoots.
Yeah, I don't know if he was. Yeah, maybe he was actually fired. I don't know.
And yeah, I didn't see that anywhere else, but because originally it was shown in a double bill with the film called The Female Animal.
Yeah,
and
I knew that. Yeah.
And Harry Keller directed that film too.
Yeah, what it was 1976. They discovered a preview version which had more of the Welles footage. So that was in 76, and then it was in 98. Producer Rick Schmidlin, working with editor Walter Murch and another critic, recreated some sort of reconstruction that added in more stuff. So that's the more widely available version now and stuff. But yeah, it had to have been disappointing from Welles' perspective, because he'd been gone for about a decade. He comes back, he does this movie. It's a pretty good movie. They cut it down to hell. It fails, and then that's the end of him in Hollywood, and he'd spend the rest of his career doing movies outside of that system.
Right.
You kind of can't blame him.
Yeah, apparently there was a commentary and there was a documentary called Restoring Touch of Evil that was supposed to come out with a DVD, but apparently was blocked by his daughter. I don't know why she would want to block it, but and then it was eventually, I think, released with that full restoration in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So many different cuts of this film. It's like 6 or 7 different cuts, and they're all off by a few minutes. I don't know what all is different. Yeah. Maybe some of those have that additional footage shot by that other director.
It's possible, yeah.
I mean, maybe that original version has that. We got to get rid of this tracking shot in the beginning. It's just wasting too much time.
Mm-hmm. yeah. Who cares? Yeah. Just get to the explosion. You should just start with the car blowing up. Boom. What just happened? Well, I'll tell you, hysterical woman.
Oh, whoa, calm down. And he slaps her.
Yeah. It was a great moment. I don't know if you ever got around to watching it, but I remember one of the shows, there was only 6 episodes, was the Garth Marenghi show. Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. That has a great moment, where something's happening and the woman, she's not even yelling or anything like that, but she's, something bad's happening, and he just slaps her and she goes, "Thanks, I was hysterical."
Yeah.
I love that. I'm gonna have to rewatch that.
It's a good show.
It was an awesome show. I'm Garth Marenghi. You're about to enter my dark place.
It's a great name too.
Yeah. Should have definitely had more than 6 episodes.
Yeah. Stuff like that's, I don't know. It's usually better in small doses.
Yeah, I agree. I always, champion that when I talk, especially about, the British shows, how But still, 6 is very short. I mean,
Sure.
how about 12? 12 would have been okay. You know, I think they could have kept the quality up for 6 more. But anyway,
two series of 6 each.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, that's too bad. But yeah, that was an awesome show. But yeah, thanks. I was hysterical.
Unlike American shows that just keep going until like, I guess the ratings drop off enough to where they don't want to do it anymore. Or
Yeah.
it's not financially viable.
Yeah, I don't talk about shows much, and I don't have as much history with them. But it's always interesting when shows go on so long that by the time you get into the later seasons, like there's like cast turnover, and it seems really different. So I told you that I was rewatching That 70s Show, and I did do it. Except I refuse to watch the last episode because I don't like it when things end. Although maybe I will watch it and just get over that. But and it's just weird how different the 8th season is, because the 8th season doesn't have Eric. And then in the first 4 episodes, only the first 4 episodes have Kelso. In that, they just say they have what's his name credited as a special guest star, Ashton Kutcher, and then they have a guy played by Seth Meyers' brother as like a new character, and it's just interesting because it shows that the show maybe could have gone on longer. Like it actually could have survived them, and I don't even mind his character. His character seems to fit in okay, but then it just ends. Which makes sense because it's the 8th season, and really the show is supposed to be focusing on teenagers. So they did milk it all for all it was worth. I was surprised how well they did keep the quality up, though. I expected it to start dipping a lot earlier than it did. So I give it credit. Here, since I'm really good at telling long, meandering stories, here's one for everybody. Here's why I wound up watching That 70s Show all the way through when I found it was on Netflix. So so my sister's husband is a really weird, eccentric guy, but he's also really good at like noticing things, and he's really great at giving gifts, and he's given me some really good presents over the years. So this year he got me some things, and one of the things he got me, he got me a couple CDs, because people can still get those. Not that they were like from a store or anything like that, but one was like a greatest hits compilation of the band Supertramp, and the other was a double album by somebody named Todd Rundgren, and I didn't recognize the name. And he said, "Well, I know you like piano centric kind of music," and he said this has some of that stuff on. And I thought, okay, and then I put it away and I didn't listen to it. And then like sometime like in February, I was doing the thing I do where like I'm on Wikipedia reading something and one leads to another, and I'm going down these rabbit holes and I'm reading all this stuff. So on the article, I'm reading about, you remember the band XTC? Maybe most notably for doing that song "Dear God," where they sing about the "Dear God" song shows up in the It remake. Actually, when you're in the "Everything Is Bad" montage of the movie, that "Dear God" song plays. Where the kid talks about how he doesn't believe in God and stuff like that. Anyway, and they did another song that was more famous, but it was more famous after it got covered. For the Dumb and Dumber soundtrack, Canadian band Crash Test Dummies covered the song called "Peter Pumpkinhead," which I'm sure you remember. But anyway, XTC did the original version a couple years earlier, the Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead, with that harmonica bit and stuff like. Anyway, I'm sure you know it. Anyway, so I was thinking about that song. So I was reading about XTC, and then I found out like their most popular album came out in like '86 or something like that. I was reading the article about that '86 album, and it said that because their album before that had not performed well, the studio basically forced a list of producers on them, said, okay, you guys can't produce yourselves anymore, we're going to drop you from the label. So here's a list of producers, and you're going to pick one and work with them. And they didn't like anybody on the list, except they saw one name they recognized, Todd Rundgren. So they would do that. So I found out, Todd Rundgren, that's how I know the name. He produced that album, I guess. That's weird. Or it's like, that's not how I know it. It's not like I'm a big XTC fan. I don't even own the album. Then I was reading, and they were like saying how like they picked him because he'd done a song in the '70s called "I Saw the Light," and they were like, they thought that was a pretty good song, so we tried to work with him. And I thought, I know that song. So I play it on YouTube, and I'm like, yeah, I know that song. So then I break out the album, and I start listening to the album. It's pretty good. "I Saw the Light" isn't the most famous track on it. The most famous track is a song called "Hello, It's Me." So I look up "Hello, It's Me" on Wikipedia, and I find out it was actually from the '60s when he was part of a different group. But then in the early '70s, for his first solo record, he re-recorded and got famous. Then I read it says that in the first episode of That 70s Show, that's what the plot's about. They're going to a Todd Rundgren concert. And the episode ends with everybody in the car singing along to "Hello, It's Me." Then I read that it worked as a coda for the series, that in the very final episode of the 8th series, in the season finale, they're all back in the car singing to that song. And I was like, isn't that interesting. And then like a day or two later, I saw that 70s show in its entirety was on Netflix. So I was like, I'll watch the whole thing. So that is why I watched that 70s show.
So blame your brother-in-law.
Yeah, Todd Rundgren.
Blame Todd Rundgren. So the 8th season is where Fez and Jackie live together in an apartment, right?
Yeah, and it ends with them actually getting together, which I don't like at all.
Really?
We're going to talk about shipping. I was really upset that like she and Hyde didn't stay together. It always made sense to me that she and Hyde was the couple that was going to make it. Instead, they break up, and Hyde's fine with it, and everybody's fine with it, and she winds up with Fez, which is ridiculous. So she's gone. She just went through the group.
Yeah, I was going to say she fucked everybody.
Except for Eric, of course, which is the running joke, like, because she thought Eric was gross and stuff. But yeah, it ends with them together, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, so this is when Gopher Trace went on to explore his lucrative film career.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well, did it, Topher? I mean, what'd you do? Win a date with Tad Hamilton wasn't quite the smash success he was hoping for.
Well, none of those guys have done anything. The other one, the
Mila Kunis is easily the most successful.
Well, yeah, totally. But well, I mean, the who's the tall redhead? She's done stuff too.
Laura Prepon.
Yeah.
Most notably, all I can remember her from movies is she's in that like straight to DVD or Netflix movie where they made it called Carla, about Carla Homolka, the woman that was that married Paul Bernardo. And also, like years before that, she had a very small role in some like teen sex comedy where there was a whole scene of like her masturbating and it was played off for laughs. I don't know. It was like accepted. It was something like that. It was one of those early 2000s like college type movies.
I gotta look that up.
She's not an important character, but she's like the roommate of a character. There's a whole scene about her masturbating, and I can't remember how they do it, but it's played for laughs. Isn't it interesting how they treat masturbation in movies? There's only two ways to do masturbation in movies. One, it's really sad or possibly sick, or two, it's played for laughs. Yeah. Like we can't show that masturbation is just an ordinary thing that normal, well-adjusted people can do, and it doesn't mean anything. It's either like the last refuge of some sad, sick, demented freak, or it's just like, haha, look, they're masturbating, and it's all played for laughs because maybe somebody's going to walk in on them or something.
You're right. That's the way it is in Mulholland Falls. No, Mulholland Drive.
Mulholland Drive?
Yeah, you remember at the end when she's like flipping out and, just like on a just crazy tangent? Yeah.
And I mean, and it's fine if it's the movie. I'm not going to pick on that movie. And it is true that sometimes people can get very emotional when flipping out during masturbation sessions. But I'm just saying 99% of masturbation in the world is actually just a very normal, banal thing, But movies like, and I mean, most movies don't need a masturbation scene. I get it, and I'm not going to go on this crusade. But it is funny that you only get those two extremes. It's either like some like sad, twisted freak, like I don't know, a stalker masturbating while he watches like some girl from far away.
Yeah.
Or it's everybody walking in on the girl at the start of Not Another Teen Movie, and she's got the dildo going.
Or like American Pie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's really American Pie really doesn't hold up. I mean, no sex comedies do, but like there's a whole section in that where they videotape a girl masturbating and broadcast it across the internet, and there's no consequences except that she leaves the school. Like that would be a huge scandal in real life. That would be leading to a bunch of guys getting expelled and stuff, and possibly like legal action. But in this, it's just like she got transferred and she left, and we're cool.
Yeah, I really don't like those movies.
I never saw the third, or did they make 4? I saw the first 2, and they're both in there.
I think they've made a bunch of straight to DVD ones. Like after the main cast left.
Yeah, they made spin-offs. They made at least one spin-off. They made like 2 spin-offs that had Eugene what's his name?
Eugene Levy,
which is I've talked about this before. It's sad that he's such a great comedic talent, but I get it. He's taken a paycheck to be the dad for that. There's one called American Pie Presents Band Camp that he's in.
Yeah.
On the camp, and he's in at least 1 or 2 others.
It's sad that that's what he'll be known for, like modern day.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that way too. And he's such a cool, smart, articulate guy. But here's another tie-in sort of to that 70s show. So the girl who is actually really, because this is a forever ago, really cute in that the one that like masturbates with she says she masturbated with a flute. So another joke. Right. She actually guest stars in like a couple episodes of that 70s show, like from circa 2001, 2002, where she's like a cop. It's when Kelso joins the police academy. She's also a cop. Anyway, and I'm thinking, oh wow, like she was so cute and pretty back in the day.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen her in 1,000 years. And this is me being okay, male chauvinistic jerk, because the thought crossed my mind. I bet you she hasn't aged very well. And then a few days later, on like the Disney Channel or whatever they'll call Disney XD, they had a live version movie, really terrible production quality, just shit the movie out, of Kim Possible, and she plays the mom in it. Man, she looks old.
What is this, Allison Hannigan you're talking about?
Yes, that's her name. I would not have known her name.
Yeah, she did she was on Buffy, and then she did the American Pie stuff, and then she did like 10 seasons of How I Met Your Mother. So
yeah. See, I knew that she stayed and stuff, but since I don't really watch TV shows, I lost track of her, right? And but now, so I just saw her in this. Don't ask me why I watched a live action Kim Possible movie. Like, apparently, I do not value my time at all because, man, what a half-assed piece of garbage that was. That I guess I couldn't look away from. But yeah, she plays Kim's mom in that, and like they really play it up like that she's my mom and she's old and unappealing and stuff. I was like, wow, like that hurts. We talked about this before. Like it's exactly what happens. Like actresses, right? They don't get to age gracefully. It's like, okay, now you're the mom.
There's no way she needs the money. Why would you do that?
I don't know, man.
Really? I mean, she's probably making like close to $1 million an episode for How I Met Your Mother. That was like the #1 show on television for a while.
I had no idea it was that popular. I heard it was because it was a big deal because Doogie Howser was part of like a big career comeback. Everybody loves him now. I'm not saying
playing like a raging like alpha male.
Yeah, which is pretty funny, I guess, because in real life he's gay and
right. Well, I think he came out while he was on that show, like after it had been on for quite a while.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought he did it after that people knew. Okay, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of an extension like of how that Harold and Kumar movie just brought him out of oblivion. Right? They're like, hey, here's a fun reference. And you know what would be really funny? If you're just like crazy and like snorting blow and doing hookers and stuff. And they're like, yeah. And then people liked it so much. They're like, hey, we remember you. You can have a show again.
Which is remember Starship Troopers?
There he is. Right? Because like that was his career, right? Like he was like a child star and like so many others did not grow up very gracefully. He has like a small role in a shit movie like that. And that's sort of the last we hear from him. But then because of like a weird kind of obscure joke, it gets his whole career going again. And now he was like hosting like some sort of like variety show. Like he's like the guy. He's been like the guy for like that last 10 years. That's fine. I don't think that's Neil Patrick Harris. That's his name. He's cool by me. Yeah, but no, I thought he'd already come out as gay before that show. So that's kind of funny.
I don't think so. Let me double check, but I'm pretty sure that he came out because I think he was waiting to make sure that show was going to be successful.
That makes sense.
Because it does kind of hurt your career. I mean, maybe not so much now, but as a as a sex symbol,
sure,
on a show, I don't know.
You
think about someone differently.
I thought the first Harold and Kumar was okay, and then the sequels are bad. But in the last sequel, like the weird Christmas one, when he comes back, it is pretty funny because it like acknowledges like how much his career has changed. Because he's like this big star and stuff like that, and like again he's still acting the same way. And they're like, wait a minute, I thought he's like hitting on these two girls, and they're like, I thought you were gay. And it's like, I am gay for that pussy or something like that, which is like a super funny line. I mean, that's a pretty funny line.
Wow, that's hilarious.
He points out like it's all an act. It's like people love, I pretend I'm gay. It's pretty funny. But I would not advise watching that movie.
Let's see. It came out in 2006.
That's right around the time that show started, isn't it?
Yeah, let's see. 2005 through 14. So yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't really done a whole lot that I really care about, but yeah, I don't have a problem with him at all.
He always seemed like a pretty likable guy. But yeah, he was most recently, he had some sort of like crazy variety show, like Circus of Awesome or something like that.
They really tried to get those to jump off again, like become popular
variety
again.
Shows, yeah.
Yeah, they're really
a million of them.
Wayne Brady's had one going. I guess people watch it.
People watch anything, man.
It's like the Gong Show or some shit they tried to get off, or like
oh yeah, bring everything back, sure.
Yeah, all that
the
old
show
stuff.
Everybody's freaking out about nowadays is The Masked Singer. That seems to be the most popular one. That's all. Anytime I log into Twitter, it's people like. I'm not saying like it's a waste of time. I guess I do stupid things too, but I can't imagine like pouring all my heart and soul into a bunch of tweets about The Masked Singer. But whatever, fine.
It's the whole thing is you tweet who you think it is.
Exactly.
Is that the appeal?
I guess so. Yeah, and they eventually do reveal it and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Like
the only thing I liked about The Masked Singer was like one of the first episodes. Apparently, I guess Donny Osmond was one of them. And I know this sounds weird, but I am a huge Donny Osmond fan. I love Donny Osmond. He's one of my favorite vocalists. I think he's an incredible singer. I've always loved Donny Osmond. Which is really funny and weird to say.
I was reading about like their childhood and Marie and stuff. Like, oh man, a lot of bad stuff went on in that household.
Oh yeah. They were like the darkest Mormons you could imagine.
Yeah.
And they were like the white bread Mormon version of like the Jackson family kind of thing. What's really funny is like many, many years ago, speaking of seeing older things in the early 90s and not really knowing much. So many, many years ago, again, I've talked about how I used to have a Family Channel, which was a pay channel back then. And I've talked about how it was actually a much more Disney-centric. It wasn't just a bunch of shitty sitcoms and bullshit that's out now. It was like real stuff. That's how I saw like the true classic stuff, like the classic, Mickey Donald and Goofy cartoons and all this stuff. And they often had some specials on. And one of them was a special from like 1957 or something like that. It was like an hour special from the Wonderful World of Disney that was chronicling. It was like kind of like a documentary style, chronicling like the opening days of Disneyland.
Oh yeah.
So they had like the camera and they're going around the park and they're showing various attractions and stuff like that. So there's this part. So I was watching this again, probably 91 or something like that. I knew it was old though. So there's this part where there's like like something going on in the square, like maybe a big like fireworks display or something. So it's nighttime. There's a bunch of people. There's like a huge crowd, hundreds of people out watching various things going on. Suddenly, at one part, like as the camera makes its way through the crowd is sort of parted, and we realize that there's these boys, and everybody's like made some room for them because the boys are going to perform. And there's like 5 boys, and they're singing like a cappella and stuff, and people are clapping for them, and they introduce them all. And the youngest one is Donnie, and I realized it's the Osmonds. Before they were like big and before they became a thing, here they are like doing a cappella at Disneyland's opening. It was sort of cool. Like years later to realize, holy shit, that was the Osmonds. Like before they were famous.
Were they all like young?
Before Marie was even born.
Oh wow, yeah, they were young.
She wouldn't even have been born. I don't think. There's an age gap there, isn't there? Kind of similar to like the Michael and Janet thing, because I know Janet. There's an age gap.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty well. I think it's Michael and then Janet, right? And then there's older siblings after.
Yeah,
I don't know.
What's funny is like for most of my life, I didn't realize that like when Michael left the Jackson 5, there was a brother younger than him in between him and Jack that replaced him in the Jackson 5 very briefly. He does have a younger brother. Anyway, there's no time to get into this, but yeah, I finished the second part of Leaving Neverland today, so pretty interesting stuff.
Where are you watching that?
I have access to my parents' Crave account, so in Canada that's merged with TMN, so that has HBO on it.
HBO, okay.
So I personally do not have HBO. I'm just able to access my parents' accounts through my laptop. Yeah. I don't have a package with HBO. It costs too much here.
It's $15 for that for just for HBO.
Yeah.
So that's a little too pricey for me, but
it's like HBO plus TMN, and it's like 20 something.
That's still a lot.
TMN is like it is a lot. TMN is like the movie channel here. It's like the newer movies come out on, stuff like that. But anyway, certainly it's funny that my parents still pay for it because I don't think even they've used that much. But as long as they do, I can take advantage. What I'm doing is technically illegal. It's technically violating the terms and services agreement. Whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, they gave it to you. To use. I don't think it's...
Yeah, because they don't even use it. Like I said, it used to be called TMN Go. Now it's merged with Crave, so it's just Crave. But they never used it, right? Like, they have the TV, they don't need to. But so on my computer or whatever, I can access it. And so I'm able to watch various TMN and HBO things. I don't know if you saw this. So here was an eye-opener on... So in February, one of the things I like about HBO was John Oliver's show Last Week Tonight. It was all I don't understand its schedule, but like it stopped in like December or maybe even before December. Anyway, it was off for a few months and then it came back in February. So like just a few days ago, I was like, oh shit, that's finally come back. There must be at least a couple episodes on there. So there were 2 at the time. There's 3 now. So I was watching the very first episode and they were talking about, the normal stuff that had been going on, the shutdown and the wall and stuff like that. But then they digressed to do a story about IKEA. And they were talking about how there was like this thing at IKEA about how the IKEA had sold this map and all customers had pointed out and wanted to return it because they pointed out rightly that the map did not include New Zealand. So they had to do this big thing about how like IKEA, had to take the maps back and stuff like that. And the bigger story goes on to like, actually, this happens a lot. There's a lot of maps coming out in the world to this day that forget New Zealand, including the board game Risk. But anyway, when they showed a picture of it, I thought, holy fuck, that's the map I bought in December, and here it fucking is. And here's the little picture. And I don't know if anybody can tell, but that doesn't have New Zealand on it. There is no New Zealand. So I bought that goddamn map. So that was kind of funny because I think that's like the first time something like on like Last Week Tonight directly affected me. I like rushed into my bedroom. I was like, holy shit, that's the map I bought. And sure enough, I guess I'll keep it because it's kind of a collector's item, I guess.
Yeah, it's obviously they probably took it out of stores, right?
Yeah. Because I figure if I brought it back and said I wanted a proper map, they would still want this back, and I don't want to give it back. So I guess I'll eventually put a map up that doesn't have New Zealand on it. This is expensive, too, and I can't even put it up yet because you have to buy a special mount to put it on. So I haven't even bought the mount yet. I just bought this.
It's a pretty good-sized island to not include it.
And it's an entire country.
Right. But I'm just saying it's like...
Oh, yeah, I know. But yeah, it's funny if you see the episode, there's a whole thing like how like in New Zealand, like they're well aware of it, and they constantly like they have like government messages and stuff trying to tell the rest of the world that they exist and not to forget about them.
I mean, it's like the same size as Madagascar.
Oh yeah,
or even Ireland. I think it's bigger than Ireland.
It's bigger than Ireland.
Iceland, it's a lot bigger than Iceland.
Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty funny.
Bigger than Cuba, bigger than Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Beautiful, one of the most beautiful countries. I mean, everybody knows about it now because of the Lord of the Rings being shot there, and it was the perfect place to shoot the Lord of the Rings because it had all the correct geographical features.
Right.
Everything you need for Lord of the Rings is right there in that fairly small country. Maybe I'll go someday. It would be nice. But anyway, yeah. So, but I guess I'll hold on to my map that doesn't have it because it's kind of an interesting thing to have. That was just sort of funny. Just sitting there. Well, that was part of the thing that they did on that show. He gave us a link to a URL that had like a picture of New Zealand that you could print out, and the joke was then you can stick it on your maps. So yeah, but that was just sort of funny because like it's just weird. I'm just watching. I'm like, oh, that's funny, and I'm like, that's the fucking map I watched.
Yeah, what are the odds?
Yeah. Damn you, IKEA. That was pretty funny.
I've heard a lot of stuff about IKEA, like about how they don't like treat their employees very well and stuff like that.
I don't know. We only just got this IKEA just short of 2 years ago, so it's been kind of life-changing for me because it's given me access to quality things that I didn't have before, like actual bookshelves that aren't like made of flimsy crap.
Yeah.
What's funny is well, not Halifax, but Dartmouth, which is Dartmouth had an IKEA in the 80s. I didn't even know that until they were doing news stories about the new one coming back, and they had footage of the old one from the 80s. I was like, I never knew that. I mean, I didn't live here back then, but still, kind of funny. But yeah, it's the biggest store I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, alleged forced labor, Nazi ties.
Man,
are they Swedish?
They're Swedish, the least offensive country in the world. There's nothing less offensive than Sweden. So yeah, I guess when you get anything that big, right, stuff's gonna.
Right.
And IKEA is pretty huge. All I can say is, I mean, I don't think of myself as much of a consumer whore as maybe the average person, although I certainly am a consumer whore. But I will say that having an IKEA here has enriched my life. The new mattress I'm on that I got in September is from IKEA. I was first going to buy a much more expensive one. Now maybe this one's not as good, but at least it was a pretty good price and it's a good quality. So yeah, my life has actually been greatly improved by IKEA in the last like year or two, mainly for the bookshelves though. I still have a couple more to get. So nice to have bookshelves that aren't just flimsy plyboard garbage that I had to get at like Walmart and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which literally, I mean, actually happened, like collapsed under the weight of my books. I've had like a whole shelf go and it all bend.
Yeah, it like gradually bends in the middle over time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these IKEA bookshelves are strong and they'll hold my stuff. And they're big and they're white, which is great.
The furniture's not like it. I mean, not like it used to be type thing. I'm not talking about like even in our lifetime, like, like when our parents were growing up, like furniture was made out of real wood. Now everything is made out of plywood.
As we said, like at least in our parents' day, things were made to last. Now everything, the whole point of nowadays is to replace everything every like 5 or 10 years. Like a washer, dryer, or a fridge, or a freezer, and all this stuff. Like, and everybody acts like it's normal. What's funny too is like how everybody acts like, we're so conscious of stuff like recycling and stuff now. We're so much smarter. Maybe we are, but we might be more wasteful than ever. Especially if you watch it. Now, of course, I don't watch. But speaking of garbage TV, on HGTV, a lot of those like design shows and stuff, where or those property shows, because you'll have like some stupid like 30-something couple come in. So this is my generation, and they'll be like, get rid of it, all of it. Pull out those. And all they're doing is just like trashing all this stuff because it doesn't fit their style. They're like, this is all going in a landfill. They'll be like, oh, this kitchen is so gross.
Right.
Like, destroy the counters, destroy the cabinets. It's wasteful as fuck.
Sometimes you see them want to retain the style.
That's nice, but I think that's
like
more
that. What is it? The 50s modern, the modern contemporary.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's what you call it. It's like the you can imagine it's just real like crazy, crazy wallpaper and crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, so many times I've just been flipping, I'm not even watching, and suddenly I'll just see like this couple walk into a room. They're like, "Get rid of all of it. This all has to go." Like, and they'll like laugh and joke, like, "Oh, that's so like 1997." I'm like, yeah, that was a million years ago, 1997. Stuff like that. But anyways, let's circle back to Welles here. We don't have to say. I mean, we're going to do a few more episodes on it, so we don't have to say everything there is to say about him yet. But I mean, as much as like film noir appeals to me, I'm not as huge a fan of the genre as a lot of people might think I would be. But this is a very interesting film noir just because of its backdrop and its setting, and even the focus of its characters is much different. So I like it for reasons like that. And we're going to talk more about Welles as an actor. I mean, Welles is arguably just as good an actor as he was director, and I mean, I don't know who else you could say that about, really.
Right.
And I mean, I think directing was more his passion than acting, and it's been noted that often there were roles he took just so that he could not pay the bills, or so he could fund movies. Like sometimes, like that. I think that's why he was in Third Man. Like he just was in it for financial reasons. Like he was hoping he'd get some money out of it. He could put George making his film, and yet The Third Man is a fucking brilliant performance. And like the most famous part of that role is this speech he gives towards the end, and he improvised that. Like that wasn't even written by somebody else. So like, I mean, this guy was a true multi-talented, multifaceted individual, and I think one of the reasons why he sometimes didn't have as much success is just sometimes I think people misunderstood him and couldn't keep up with him. I think he, thought on like multiple levels, and other people didn't catch up to that. I mean, especially when we talk about the suits and the executives and stuff that's so prominent nowadays. It existed back in his day too, and you can just imagine like this boardroom folding their arms and being like, "Well, that's not commercial," or "How are we going to market that?" And it led to like his decline of like, not having much money and having to do embarrassing things like sell like third-rate wine and get hammered off
man.
of that.
Is there a clip of that somewhere of the takes on that?
You can watch that on YouTube.
I gotta watch that.
And I say, as much as I love and respect Welles, I don't think I'm doing him any disservice by saying to you, our viewers, you should watch him like drunkenly do these commercials because it is really funny. I mean, yeah, sure, it's sad because you think, oh, he's sunk kind of low here, but at the same time, you can't. It's objectively funny. It's pretty damn hilarious. Like they're like the one is like it's like this couple at the table and he's there and he's like ah he just goes ah like who actually talk before he even says the lines like the best French champagne like and it's all slurred. My God, it's awful. But I mean, I think he did have a sense of humor about himself. But yeah, but towards in his later stages, as we said, this movie was like he wasn't complete. He wasn't epically fat yet for this movie, as it was pointed out. He did have like some fat suit on him, but this was the start of him getting epically fat, and he just embraced it, man. Like in the '70s, he was super fat and like he loved to eat. He would like go to a restaurant and like order like fucking everything they had on the menu like 3 times over and just sit there all day eating and like while and he loved to talk and he had people over like anybody like he was like friends with and stuff like usually had to like eat with him because that was like how you got that like if you were hanging out with Wells, well he was going to eat so you might as well eat too. Like so he loved life, I guess. It's pretty much funny like that was like the best way to track Wells down if you wanted to find him. It's like, what's the best restaurant in this city? Because he's probably has like a back table like on permanent reserve there that he's just constantly at. So I mean, I give him a lot of credit for that. He also did a commercial for frozen peas in the '70s that I haven't seen that I think you can find. That's supposed to be pretty damn funny.
I feel like I've seen this stuff parodied like on Saturday Night Live or something.
Yeah, he became quite parodied, as we said. He became sort of a parody of himself in many ways. He was the insufferable genius. He was the avant-garde filmmaker, but then he also became the large ham, the larger than life personality that we know. And he was also a big guy. And but I've always enjoyed him in interviews. You can tell he was a very smart guy. He was always operating at a really high clip. And trying to think. Before a few months ago, when I was looking up some stuff about Wells, I can't remember what it was, but it might have even been in "They'll Love Me When I'm Dead." There's a part where like he's in France and they're interviewing him, and the whole thing's in French, and he's speaking completely fluid French back. So smart guy. And I, not to pick on America or anything like that, but I mean, in a way, it sort of goes against the grain of an American filmmaker to even like learn another language in a way. Like Wells was over in Europe, and French wasn't the only thing he could speak either. I think he could speak a couple others, at least passively, but he was fluent in French. Fluent in French. His French is very good. I was really impressed. Wow. Oh, by the way, Maurice LaMarche is the name of the voice actor, and he's the guy that did the Brain in Pinky and the Brain.
Okay.
I've always been a big fan of him. He's Canadian actually, but he's been in just all sorts of stuff. Like you name like a popular cartoon, like particularly from the '90s, he was part of it. He did voices on both versions of the Ghostbusters cartoon, Freakazoid, Bonkers, and and there was a few, and of course, oftentimes on Futurama, using that particular sort of Orson Welles voice. He uses it in Futurama. Yeah, he's all over the place. Maurice LaMarche.
He's not the voice of Bender, is he?
No.
As I was listening to a podcast with the guy that does, he does Fry, but he also did like Ren and Stimpy and stuff.
Yeah, that's Billy West.
Billy West, that's it. And he was talking about it's another famous like voice actor that does the voice of Bender.
Yeah, I always forget his name.
And I was like, maybe that's him because lots of really talented folks on that show.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that guy's a prominent guy too. But LaMarche wasn't one of the main characters, but he was a lot of recurring people on Futurama, a whole bunch of them. And a few of them are just different voices, but there's at least one or two that he does that is that like Orson Welles voice, which again, if people want to know what that sounds like, it sounds like the Brain from Pinky and the Brain. Try to take over the world. That's my best impression. Not very good. But yeah, anyway, he's a fascinating character. And as I said, he just had such an impact on the world of film, and he's so prolific and so multifaceted. I think I'll enjoy doing a few more episodes on him. Touch of Evil, I think, is one of the more mainstream ones that he did. I think, at least in that it was a Hollywood film, and it was less say artistic or experimental as some of his other stuff. But it's still a really good example of him as a filmmaker and an actor. And I think the main reason I want to touch on it because I really like the performance of that character. So I thought it was a really good one to start with. And again, if you're like a fan of crime dramas or film noirs, it's kind of an essential one, particularly in film noir. You can decide for yourself whether you think it's the last true film noir or if that ever actually ended, or etc. But he'd move on from this and do some very different stuff, mostly in Europe after this. Well, I said he never did an American film again, or Hollywood film again. He didn't as a director, but he did as an actor return for a few things. And I think we mentioned this before. His last ever role that I'm pretty sure was the voice of Unicron in the Transformers movie. By then he was so close to death and ill that I think they had to do some digital overlays to like strengthen his voice because he was getting super weak on some of the takes. Stuff. And I'm not saying that Orson Welles was wrong for not taking Transformers seriously, because it is just Transformers, but how he describes it was hilarious because it makes it sound like he thought it was such garbage, because he's just like he talks about like how it's like this world of toys that smash each other, and he plays the giant biggest toy that eats the other toys, and I'm like, well, I guess he's not wrong.
That's funny.
I mean, Transformers did exist to sell toys. That was its #1 mandate. And they do smash each other. And Unicron did eat them. So none of that is wrong. But it was kind of a weird note for the great Orson Welles to end his career on, Unicron. I mean, the guy went from Citizen Kane to Transformers, to him doing banter with, what's his name? Star Trek guy, Leonard Nimoy.
Oh.
And all 80s power ballads playing. You got the touch, dude. Oh, you got the power. I love that movie.
Boogie Nights?
That's in Boogie Nights.
Oh.
But it's also in Boogie Nights, it's the main character is trying to sing it, and he can't sing. It's like Marky Mark's character trying to do a version of it, and he can't sing at all. But I mean, the actual version of that song, like the real version of that, is in the Transformers movie, along with all sorts of like 80s
metal. There's some great songs on that soundtrack.
Transformers! That song done by a band called Lion.
Lion, yep. Yeah. Lion's pretty awesome.
I don't doubt it.
The name Lion is like the most 80s thing you could possibly think of.
It really
a band named Lion. Or like a color and then an animal.
Yeah.
White snake, white lion, Def Leppard.
Tells you everything you need to know. Oh man, I hate Def Leppard. If I was like
one arm though, come on.
I respect that. I respect that the dude could keep drumming after losing an arm. I absolutely respect that. But man, I cannot stand Def Leppard.
I'm not really a fan either.
But I think they're the worst like popular band to come out of England. I can't think of a worst English band that was like big, like, because when I talk about like worst bands, I have to say within the context of being somewhat successful and selling records and being known. Otherwise, I could be just like the Crucifix are the worst band. And who's gonna say I'm wrong? It's goddamn Crucifix. If you haven't heard them, look them up on YouTube and tell me that I'm wrong. But I mean, yeah, when I talk about like worst bands, I mean ones that actually have fans and success and stuff. To me, in the context of like overall success and acclaim and selling records and pop culture and all that, to me, the worst band is Motley Crue. I despise them beyond words that I have at my disposal. I cannot tell you how much I loathe Motley Crue. Every note of their music and everything about their existence bothers me. But anyway,
I mean, the sad thing is like Tommy Lee is actually a really talented guy. Like I think he plays guitar and drums.
Oh, he's certainly talented.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
and he's probably not as big a dick as say like Nikki Sixx, but he's up there.
They're both in that band?
Yep.
Okay. Nikki Sixx, yeah, I've seen him somewhere, and he's trying to
He had
stay
like
relevant.
it's some reality show not too long ago or
And
something.
his hair is in his face and shit. Like you look like a utter and complete douchebag.
Yeah.
You remember when who was the guy on Rock of Love?
Is that guy from Poison?
Yeah, what's his name?
Bret Michaels?
Yeah, that's it. He he had his bandana to cover up his bald spot, and it fell off one time during a I think his hair and his bandana fell off together.
Nice. That's so undignified. Or a one-hit wonder from the 80s.
They should have a douche off. Mm-hmm. Who's the biggest douche of them all?
Yeah, but as far as I can tell, Motley Crue was more successful. Poison, I'm pretty sure, were basically a one-hit wonder. They had Every Rose Has Its Thorn, and that's pretty much it. But Motley Crue had multiple hits.
I just remember Poison being they're the ones that legitimately tried to look like females.
Yeah, they were
they had full makeup, full women's makeup, rouge and stuff.
I mean, when you're talking about hair metal, they're maybe the quintessential example of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm long poofy hair. That's one thing, but having blush on and lipstick and shit.
Yeah, blush and lipstick and jumpsuits and hooker boots. But anyway, people don't need to know more about my personal feelings on the 80s hair metal scene, except that I would say it certainly was not my scene. I was the antithesis of that, and I loved the music that killed it, the grunge of the early 90s.
I've kind of swung back the other way. I understand it's stupid, but I like some of that stuff. It's I liked it at the time, the tail end, when I was listening to music.
I mean, some of it is less offensive to me. But, for instance, I can handle Bon Jovi. I don't like Bon Jovi, but I can handle it. And I would say there's more substance to say Bon Jovi than most of those bands.
But grunge came around right when I was 10 in 1990, so
yeah,
that's when Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and stuff were starting to come out. So that's really what formed my musical taste.
Yeah. And for me, it was alternative. For me, it was several years later, so it was post grunge. But post grunge made me look back to the grunge, and I like the grunge too. I wasn't quite the demographic age for grunge because basically I became aware of Kurt Cobain the day he died.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. I was a big fan of Nirvana when he died.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't one of these crazy people, but
right. But I was, I was just a few weeks away from turning 11 when he died.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's when I was making the transition from, I think I said this before, I remember being 11 and 12 and being worried because I felt like a lot of my peers were ahead of me because they liked all this music. And I was like, I don't like this music. I like, the old music my parents play. I like the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And fine. Yeah. You get a little older and you get absorbed into it and stuff. And
I was exactly the same way. Yeah. That's what I started with. The Beatles and the Beach Boys and, lots of 50s artists.
Sure.
50s, 60s. And some 70s too.
Oh yeah. I still love all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even though I like shit on the 80s, there was music from the 80s I liked. Yeah. Just not what was the dominant stuff. I like a lot of 80s music, but not really what people think of when they think of 80s music. The most stuff that I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. But there's stuff from the 80s.
Like a lot of poppy synth type stuff.
Yeah, some of it. What's funny is I like new wave more as a concept than the actual music. I think I've talked about collecting records and vinyl. I haven't bought many in a long time because I don't use. But back when I was buying it, I used to I'd buy a new wave album I could find, and it had less to do with the music and just wanting to own it in a way. I like some of the music, but I like Blondie, I like Talking Heads, but I don't love them. But it was essential to own those albums for whatever reason. So yeah, it was kind of I liked everything about it, but the music was kind of secondary.
Yeah.
When it came to new wave, there's some new wave I kind of like, but it'll never be oh, I love new wave. No. Again, maybe I would have if I was say 10 years older. If I'd been born, say, in 1973 instead of 83, then when New Wave was becoming a big thing, I would have been that age. Maybe I would have been really into it. Who knows? We're all shaped for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's like Mike, you always used to talk about, like, when alternative came out, like, he hated it.
Yeah, because it was the antithesis of all the stuff he really liked.
Right.
And I understand it. Sometimes we just can't break out of these things. And as much as I want to be the guy that doesn't like anything that comes out now, I really do have a hard time liking anything that comes out now. And
even artists I like I couldn't tell you the last time that I legitimately liked some new music. It's been a while.
They can't keep going forever. I lose track. Some of the bands that I like are still together and cranking out albums, but I haven't paid attention to them for 10 years.
Sad.
That's just how it goes.
And I don't know if it's me. I don't know if I've changed or they're not any good,
Yeah. It's probably a little mix.
Yeah.
Mix of both.
It's like bands that I've tried to support, and continue to buy their records as they come out, but I just don't care for them,
There's very few artists that are still coming out that I liked way back then. I still like. Ben Folds is one. I love everything Ben Folds has ever done. I'll always love him. Ben Folds is my favorite Southerner that I don't know. You're my favorite Southerner, Jay. But Ben Folds is my favorite. Is my favorite famous Southerner.
Where is he from? Do you know?
Oh man, I used to know. Pretty deep. Hold on, let me double check where he was actually born. I mean, he even says y'all, and I don't mind. I give him a pass. I'm like, yeah, he can say y'all.
That's one of your pet peeves.
In a way, like it's more involuntary. Because it's kind of, I don't mean to be a jerk about it. Because it's the way that people talk. What am I going to do? Tell them they're wrong?
Yeah.
Stupid. It's just an involuntary thing. I can't help it.
Right.
I can't help it that I flinch when I hear it and stuff.
I become self-conscious when I use it now.
Yeah, and you shouldn't. I don't want to tell you shouldn't. It's your area. It's what you grew up in. So he was born in North Carolina.
Okay.
So it's not as deep as I thought, but still down there. And he's got the accent and stuff. And it's a lot of some of his songs even talk about coming from that area and that stuff. What's funny is he's got a song. There's a song on the third Ben Folds 5 album called "Your Redneck Past," which is pretty funny. Also, there's a line in one of the songs, another Ben Folds 5 song, "The Best Imitation of Myself," where it says, "Do you think I should take a class to lose my Southern accent?" But yeah. But and the other time I'm happy with y'all. It's funny when we talked about this rather than Orc, when I talked about my very limited love of hip hop, which is like almost entirely the Beastie Boys.
Right.
I don't mind when the Beastie Boys say y'all either. That's fine. It fits.
Right. It's like a New York thing, I guess.
I don't know. If it is, it's like New York just adopting something from the South, because clearly it's a Southern thing. But again, I don't care that they can say it.
Uh-huh.
I can't even remember the songs that use it. There's a few songs that use it, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. So
yeah.
But yeah, I don't mean to be a dickhead about it. And if you said it, I shouldn't be like, ha ha, you Southern hick, I
feel like people really like to throw it out, to I don't know, maybe seem casual.
I think people like to throw it out to endear themselves to people from the South, right? Like, I'm one of you, y'all.
Howdy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, if I would, let's say I become a famous author like I wanted to, and I'm on a book tour, like, I would never go, do a signing in Texas and be like, howdy. Like, that would just be, to me, that would be insulting to them,
Patronizing, kind of.
Exactly. And there's plenty of embarrassing colloquialisms where I'm from. I just don't happen to use them myself.
Right.
As I've said many times, I don't have a typical Cape Breton accent, but I grew up surrounded by it. And I never really say bye anymore, but I mean, bye is okay, I guess. Hey, bye. How's she going?
How's she going? Yeah.
How's she going?
What's Get Her Done? Isn't that, or Giver? Is that one?
Giver's Canadian, but it's not us. Giver's not Cape Breton or anything, but yeah, people say Giver. I haven't heard that in a long time, luckily.
I know a few. From some of the, just from some of the Canadian films I've seen.
Ever. But I mean, Cape Breton's small. There's not a lot of people, but there are a lot of displaced Cape Bretoners out west, spreading it around, I suppose, which is fine.
I think it's going to eventually just like there is not going to be any accent, like in the basically in the English speaking world.
It'll take a while. What's funny is like I'm always so interested in accents and I'm always so cognizant of them, but once it's a language you don't speak, you can't recognize them, right? I'll talk to Chinese people and they'll talk about different accents in different regions. Like, it all sounds the same to me. I can't figure it out. But yeah, it's not just limited to English. Accents are a weird thing, though. There's no real explanation for them.
Yeah, that's true.
Being in one geographical area makes you speak differently than being in a other geographical area. And even if you were from one geographical area and you move to another, if you're young enough, you'll adopt the new one. That's actually something that you notice right away in the Michael Jackson thing that I just watched, because the two main guys in it, one of them was Australian, but he has no accent whatsoever, and neither does his sister, because both he and the sister were quite young when they moved to the U.S. So when his older brother and his mother are talking, they're full on Australian, and he just sounds Canadian or American or whatever. So interesting thing.
Yeah, I know I've told you this before, but it's really interesting to me that like just in like the northeast section of the U.S., how many different accents there are, like distinctly different accents.
Yeah, it was like Long Island accents.
Yeah, I mean, just in New York alone, like different parts of New York City have different accents.
Bronx accents.
Yeah. Fred Armisen goes over it in one of his recent specials, which is really good, by the way. It's all about music, but
I did not like the drummer one. You mean the drummer one?
The drummer one, yeah. You didn't like it?
No. I mean, he said some things I agreed with, but it didn't really feel that funny or entertaining. I don't know. It was okay, I guess. No, yeah. I wanted to like it, but it was just.
Well, I guess I just like him.
He made some good points about some drumming trends and stuff. Like he'd say, the 90s were a lot of build-ups, just
He's from Mississippi, by the way.
Is he?
Mm-hmm.
I would not have known.
Born, like he moved away with his parents when he was young.
Didn't he do a whole show about living in the Northwest?
I'm not
Isn't
sure.
That what didn't you do a show?
Portlandia, yeah.
Isn't that about living in the Northwest?
Yeah, it's all about Portland life, I think.
See, I have no idea what somebody from like Portland or Seattle is supposed to sound like.
Yeah, I don't either.
Sound like Chris Cornell.
I would think, yeah, just like a generic, like I would think like lack of accent, really.
And how long does it take for accents to take hold? I mean, the United States was originally 13 British colonies.
Mm-hmm.
So for at least a few generations, the people that would, before America formed, would have just sounded British.
Right.
And I always wondered, like when you see movies about like the Revolutionary War and stuff like that, I'm like, they always show the Americans already having lost the accent. Mm-hmm. But maybe they hadn't. Maybe everybody still spoke British. There's nobody to confirm that. I don't know. But what's especially funny, and this is true, it often gets, it's one of those quotes that's wrong. And they'll talk about, Paul Revere's ride, and Paul Revere saying the British are coming. But he would not have said any such thing because they considered themselves British at the time.
Right.
They wouldn't be like the British are coming because they thought of themselves as British.
The redcoats or whatever.
Yeah, he would have said something else. They wouldn't have said British. But I always wondered, like, when did, these new accents start to form? When did these New England accents start to form? These Philadelphia accents, like, how long did it take? How many generations? So
that's a good question.
Instead of, doing anything productive, I'll think about things like that.
It's just like, I mean, society as a whole has become more, larger, expansive, like you and I, talking now. Like it's something that wouldn't have been possible, 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
So it's, just I think it'll be interesting to see how, the younger generations grow up with disability.
Yeah, a lot more cross-pollination.
Exactly.
Which I think is mostly a good thing.
Sure.
There's always negative sides to things too,
Yeah,
but I think it's more good than bad.
That's what I say. Like with the invention of the internet, like it's so awesome to
Oh,
me
sure.
that I can like anything I want to know about a subject, I can look up and learn about. Just in my pocket.
Yeah.
That's so amazing to me, and something that when I was a kid, like, do you remember having arguments about something, like,
Yeah.
and there was no way to prove it, you just argued.
You go
I know
home and
you're wrong,
and then they might not even believe you.
right?
You know.
But then
At
it's
least
like, hey, look at Google, it's right here. Look at Wikipedia or whatever.
We're old enough to appreciate it. We're both old enough
Yeah.
to remember having to look stuff up. I can remember doing reports for school where I had to like pore over like an article in the Encyclopedia Britannica and stuff like that.
Yeah, encyclopedias, man. That's something kids won't appreciate.
Yeah,
I spent hours just looking through encyclopedias.
Me too. Loved encyclopedias. It's funny. I think just a couple of years ago, my parents got rid of the Britannicas, and I felt kind of bad because I was like, I use them a lot.
Yeah, and my mom
there's probably collectors out there. They're probably becoming a collector's item, I bet.
That's what I was talking to my mom about, but it's like everyone has them, and they're all throwing them away.
Yeah,
I wouldn't imagine they're worth a whole lot, but it's possible.
I mean, they're not now, but maybe in 10 years,
yeah,
maybe all the throwing away is over. There'll just be certain people left that have decided to hang on to them or buy them or pick them up at yard sales or whatever.
Yeah,
stuff like this always get once something becomes rare. Yeah, we're old enough to remember that sort of difference and stuff. But I mean, it's good. But speaking of that, like I remember not even that long ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a commercial for. I don't know if it was for. It might have just been for some like internet carrier or something like that. I don't know if it aired in the U.S. or not, but it was a commercial, and it went like this: there was like a little boy, and he's like 5 or 6, and he was doing what kids do, is constantly asking questions, and the parents would say, "Ask your sister," and he had a sister who was about 2 years older than him, and she had a tablet, and she would look stuff up for him and stuff like that. I remember watching that commercial with my mother, and I said, we used to do that exact same thing. The difference was my sister Mary, she just knew because my sister was super smart.
Mm-hmm.
Mary was the tablet.
Right.
So in a way, I feel like maybe some of that's getting lost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, kids may grow up to be smarter because
you can work because there's better access to learn and maybe you will memorize it and stuff.
And it's so awesome to me that it's like, hey, what's this all about? Something I'm just curious about, and I can go learn all about it. And then I'll never have to ask, what is that about again?
But at the same time, I'm aware of so many people like making jokes and saying like, what's the point of knowing any of this? Like, it's in your pocket. You just look it up. Like, you don't need to memorize things.
Oh, that's stupid.
But yeah, I was great at memorizing, and I grew up memorizing. It was a big part of me, and that's why I felt confident when I went into French immersion, because I had to memorize a lot really fast if I was going to make it work, and I did and stuff. And so there's good and bad. I guess it all depends upon how people employ it. But I mean, it's definitely for the better. I don't want to go back to not having it. It's like I said, but but it is true. I don't think certain people of a certain age probably just don't appreciate how amazing it really is. But being able to remember the time before, having like instant access to things.
Right. I mean, you appreciated things a little more. You didn't take things for granted as much.
Yeah.
Like, we had to make an effort for our content. We had to make an effort to watch what we wanted to watch.
And as we said, it also waters a lot of things down.
Yeah.
Because the internet is also full of false information.
Right.
And stuff like that, and it's also full of useless information. It's still pretty amazing. But we can wrap up on this episode, I suppose, since we've gone off on various tangents. But don't worry, we have a lot more to say about Welles. There was no point in front-loading it all in one episode. This is just the beginning. I think we're going to do 2 or 3 more of these. 2 at least, 3 maybe. And stuff, so we're not sure what the next one's going to be. I'd love for it to be the third man, but I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. But hopefully we can do the third man. And we might even do the big one.
Citizen Kane.
Yeah, because why not? You can say, oh, it's super obvious, but at the same time, well, why not? I don't think a lot of people are actually doing it. Maybe they think it's too obvious. Maybe they think it's not worth it. Plus, as we said, we live in a world where movies are a certain age, they just get discarded, which is really too bad. The Citizen Kane was so groundbreaking and it did so many things from a technical and narrative standpoint that just set the standard going forward. And to think that, again, this was written and directed by a guy who was just 25 years old and he played the starring role is pretty mind-blowing. And, as we said, there's detractors of Welles that said it was all downhill after that. Like, he never lived up to his potential because he set the bar so high. But I don't think that's fair. I think was tremendously successful in a lot of different avenues and was very prolific and did a lot of cool, interesting things. And we'll touch more on them as we go forward. But to wrap up on Touch of Evil, came at sort of an interesting time in his career because he'd been gone from Hollywood for 10 years. He comes back, sort of takes a last stab at it, makes a pretty good movie. It gets edited, and it also gets dumped very quickly from theaters. And as you said, set up kind of to fail on a weird double bill as like a B movie. So it doesn't make much of a dent, which is not even really his fault. He didn't have much of a chance. And that was the end of him doing Hollywood movies for us for his career. But it's a damn fine film. It's certainly a really great example of film noir and a really cool, somewhat iconic performance from Welles as an actor. We've seen modern day, like the last years, we've seen movies where the director starred in the movie, but not too many. And even when they did, it's usually like a much simpler thing. It's like Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller directs a movie and stars in it. Well, that's fine. I'm not trying to tear Ben Stiller down, but again, it's probably just a comedy. It's not fucking Citizen Kane. And again, I know nothing is Citizen Kane. That's not my point. My point is just how ambitious Welles was, and how at least more often than not he pulled it off. I mean, maybe he didn't pull everything off, but nobody does. So just a really super impressive and an interesting figure in the world of film that we will explore further as we go on in this mini-series. So I guess that finishes this one off, unless there's anything else about Touch of Evil.
No, I really enjoyed it. It was my first time watch, as will be with most of these films.
It's so long, yeah. And that's the other thing that really made me want to do it, because I realized I'd only seen a very small handful of his films. I kind of knew what I knew about Welles is kind of the same way a lot of people do. It was more like secondhand. It was like, oh, I heard this or I read this, but I didn't actually fucking see the thing. This is a good excuse to see some of that. Now, I have seen The Third Man. I really like it, and I do hope we can do it. But even if we don't do some of these other films, it's an excuse to watch them. On TCM, I recorded The Magnificent Ambersons. We might not actually wind up covering that one, but I will definitely be watching it in the next little while to see what it's like. And I don't know if it makes some sort of certain impression on me. Maybe we will fit it in. But for now, we're thinking The Third Man, something else, possibly Citizen Kane, and then The Other Side of the Wind to finish on. But that's subject to change. We'll let you know how that goes as we move forward. But so that's the beginning of Orson Welles. Hopefully you're a little bit interested in that too. But yeah, I'm really glad to finally be able to get this off the ground after a couple false starts, because I really do feel like he's worth dedicating a couple episodes to, because he's just such an interesting figure. So that's going to do for tonight. That's Touch of Evil. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be with you in a week's time with the next installment of Orson Welles. So until then, that is Jay. I'm Cole. We thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Have a great night, and we'll see you again next time. Peace out.
Thanks.